Chapter 360. Son of AB***, where are you? Come out, I will definitely kill you. Renbachien was at the corner of the city wall. He quietly poked his head out and carefully looked into the darkness in the distance. He didn't notice that the antenna on his head had completely exposed him. This was the corner between the east and south walls, and it was one of the few relatively peaceful places. The battle cries came from a dozen meters away from him, but he pretended not to hear them. Pay attention to the direction of the arrow and where exactly it was shot from. Renbachien exhorted Shirhu. Shirhu also had a night vision device on his head and was looking outside curiously. He didn't expect to see people in this way with this device, and it was very novel to him. Inform the others to fire, Renbachien said to the people behind him. He had already adjusted the angle of the mortar just now, and the people who stayed there only needed to put the shell in. After a while, a bang sound was heard from inside the city. Renbachien stared at the sea of people below. Although he couldn't see the person clearly, he could more or less see some movements. He just needed to find the person who drew the bow and knocked the arrow at that time. The movement of the bowstring wasn't small, and it was very likely that he would be found. Boom! The shell directly exploded outside the city wall, and a corner of the night vision device was dyed red. At that moment, he saw at least 3 people do the same action, but none of them hit the target. Could it be one of them? Renbachien thought to himself and resisted the urge to shoot. He quietly slipped down the city wall, adjusted the angle of the mortar, hit on top of the city wall, and fired. Bang! Renbachien carefully looked at the figure in the darkness and cursed in his heart. This time, at least 10 people did the same action. Great Xia didn't only have one godly archer, so it was impossible to find the person. When Renbachien thought of this, he moved the gun rack to a position, held the trigger, and fired. It didn't matter if it was the person or not, he would just shoot first. The first 2 archers didn't even have time to react and were shot into rags. The third archer fiercely leapt backwards, then broke into a run. An expert must die. It was as if Renbachien had found the person he was looking for. He didn't care about the others at all as he fired a long metal dragon at the figure with the machine gun. However, there were too many people outside in the dark. Renbachien could only see the color blocks formed by the heat emitted by the human body. With just a few flashes, it was difficult for him to find him among the crowd. After emptying a chain of ammunition in the general direction, Renbachien allowed Shirhu to carry his spear and descend the city wall. There were still many things to do at night. She couldn't keep wasting time with him. After Renbachien fired a few artillery shells, there were a few gaps in the attacks outside the eastern city wall. This allowed the soldiers on this side of the wall to more or less take a breather. Moreover, most of the scaling ladders had been destroyed, so the intensity of the attack was still acceptable. Some of the soldiers could even take turns to rest. Renbachien used this opportunity to fire 8 consecutive cannons in the direction of the north gate. 2 of the cannons were hit, and one of them collided with the wall before falling to the ground and exploding. The other one was directly hung on the wall like the 2 on the east side. After these few cannons were fired, the Great Xia soldiers outside the city wall were immediately wiped out. More than half of the scaling ladders had also disappeared. After going through all 3 directions, Great Xia's attack finally weakened. After another hour, they finally sounded the gong to withdraw. Without the scaling ladders as a siege weapon, it was useless even if they had a large number of people. They could only speed up cutting down the trees outside to make more equipment in order to organize the next wave of attack. When the Great Xia army withdrew, many of the soldiers directly sat in a pool of blood, leaned against the wall, and fell into a deep sleep. After fighting continuously for so long, even a man made of iron couldn't withstand it. Renbachien once again led the guards up the city wall. Take that down. Renbachien pointed at the artillery shell that was nailed to the wall below and said to Shirhu, "It won't explode, right?" Shirhu knew the power of this thing as he had seen it too many times in the past 2 days. Just be careful not to touch the front. Renbachien waved his hand. He had already asked about this thing. This kind of artillery shell had 2 safeties. One was opened when the bottom was fired, and the other was the fuse at the top. A certain amount of force had to be exerted before the fuse would explode. As long as one of the conditions wasn't met, it would be safe. Not to mention being pierced by an arrow, even if it was hit by a tracer bullet, it wouldn't explode so easily. Ren Baqin asked someone to find a few pieces of cloth, cut the arrow shaft, and pulled it out. Then he wrapped the artillery shell and asked someone to carefully put it aside. The next time Great Xia attacked, they would directly throw it down. Under such circumstances, he didn't know whether it could still explode or not. Even if it couldn't explode, it could still smash someone to death. Then he carefully sized up the long arrow that was cut off from the artillery shell. It was made of wood, had a white feather tail, and a fine iron arrowhead at the front. After looking at it for a long time, he still couldn't figure out anything. Then he passed the 2 short arrows to Shirhu. "Sir, these are arrows from the same person," Shirhu said after sizing them up. "How do you know?" Ren Baqin asked curiously. "Some archers will leave a mark on the arrow, which means that this person was killed by himself. Here, there is a carving mark on both arrows," Shirhu explained as he passed the tail of the arrow to Ren Baqin and pointed at the tail. As expected, Ren Baqin looked in the direction that Shirhu pointed. Indeed, there was a small pattern at the bottom of the arrow shaft. It looked like a simple flower. All right, if he didn't die, he can be considered lucky. Ren Baqin waved his hand and no longer cared about the archer. He returned to the city commander's residence and moved out the box containing the landmines. Then he hurriedly led his men out of the city and buried 10 landmines in an area that was about 100 to 200 meters away from the city. Type 72 anti-infantry bouncing mine. After being stepped on, the grenade would jump 1 to 2 meters before exploding. The explosive power was not strong, but it contains 650 shrapnel fragments that could cause a large number of casualties within a radius of 14 meters. This type of landmine wasn't meant to kill, but to injure. After all, an injured person needed 2 people to carry him away and also needed someone to take care of him. Compared to killing him directly, it was more of a burden to the other party. Furthermore, the injured still needed to eat rations. This was also the reason why Ren Baqin brought the landmines back to Earth. Did the other party want to trade? In that case, Ren Baqin would create a large number of injured people. They couldn't fight, had to send people to take care of them, and had to consume rations. Be careful not to step on it. If anyone steps on it, they will probably be buried in the ground. Ren Baqin placed the landmines into the pit, covered it with soil from both sides, and emphasized again and again. After hearing this, the guards and winged cavalry warriors around him immediately kept quiet out of fear. Even an earthwheel expert would be seriously injured and die if they weren't careful with these things that Ren Baqin used. Each and every one of the strong men walked like cats and didn't even breathe loudly. In fact, this type of landmine would only start operating after being buried for a period of time. This was to prevent the people who laid the landmines from accidentally stepping on them. At the same time, the so-called landmines weren't like those that wouldn't jump out and explode if one stepped on or was pressed down by something. As long as one stepped on it, the fuse would be ignited. Even if one didn't move, it would explode in a short period of time, but the damage to the surroundings would be smaller. Following which, he also buried 10 landmines in the north and west of the city. Ren Baqin then brought his men back to the city and got them to find more than 10 pieces of white cloth. He used chicken claws to write on them, "Be careful where you step." "Sir, aren't we reminding them? What if they find out?" Shirhu rubbed his head and asked, "How far can we see this cloth?" Ren Baqin squinted at him and asked. Upon hearing this, Shirhu turned around and ran into the distance. He used the light from the lantern to take a closer look before running back and saying, "During the day, it should be about 30 to 40 meters, right? Now, it can't be seen clearly from about 30 meters away. How far have we buried it?" Ren Baqin was exasperated that Shirhu didn't meet his expectations. "About 50 to 60 meters. Shirhu counted with his fingers. "Isn't that enough? The other party will first step on the landmines and kill and injure a lot of people. Then, when they see the cloth on the city wall, won't they pay more attention to where they step? Even if they don't pay attention, they won't be able to stop their imagination from running wild, right? Then? We didn't bury it under the city wall, and they will find out soon. Who continued to ask. He still didn't understand Rinpoche's intention. Rinpoche crossed his arms and said with a serious face, I'm just scaring them. Who was speechless. The next day, Great Xia rested for an entire day. On the third day, they carried a bunch of scaling ladders out to continue attacking the city. At present, the large scaling ladders that looked like moving buildings were no longer there. Instead, they were all scaling ladders that looked like ladders that could be carried directly up the city wall by a few people. The army first lined up in a formation and approached Liao City with a murderous aura. When Rinpoche heard that the Great Xia army had left their barracks, he hurriedly rushed to the city wall with the Empress, Li Qianqiu, and the others. They only saw the neat army nearing Liao City after leaving the barracks. At the very front were the soldiers with shields, and behind them were the archers and the spearmen. Between the two rows of soldiers, there were a few people carrying scaling ladders. As far as the eye could see, there were at least 40 scaling ladders, and there were even more scaling ladders coming out from the barracks. Are they cutting down our trees to make these scaling ladders? Rinpoche suddenly thought of this. They are also cutting down our trees to make fires and cook. Li Qianqiu said faintly. Does this count as eating, using, and even attacking us? Rinpoche asked again. Li Qianqiu's expression froze as he had never considered this question before. After hearing what Rinpoche said, it seemed to be the case. All of a sudden, he was in a bad mood. We are almost there. Rinpoche and Li Qianqiu chatted for a while and saw that the Great Xia army was already nearing the farthest mine that was buried yesterday. Li Qianqiu knew that Rinpoche ran out to bury something at night, but he didn't know what it was. At this moment, after hearing what Rinpoche said, Li Qianqiu focused his attention and observed carefully. When a row of soldiers stepped over the first mine, the second row also stepped over it. Miraculously, they didn't step on it. However, an archer in the third row made a slight click sound when he stepped on it. A second later, when he lifted his foot, the mine directly bounced off the ground. Boom! Along with flames, countless steel balls and shrapnel were shot in all directions. In addition to the people who were closest to the mine being blown up and turned into sieves, many people were also injured by the random shrapnel. The Great Xia army's battle formations suddenly became chaotic. Then, the second mine, the third mine. Everyone at the top of the city wall looked at the gradually chaotic Great Xia army and immediately felt refreshed. Principal Ren, what kind of treasure is it this time? Li Qianqiu turned his head and asked. Jumping mine. Rinpoche replied with 2 words. He just realized something very interesting. The Great Xia army's shield soldiers were in front while the crossbowmen and archers were in the back. This was to prevent the aboriginal army from attacking and to cover them with a rain of arrows at the first instance. However, at this time, almost all the mines exploded within the crossbowmen and archers, causing the greatest damage to the crossbowmen and archers who didn't have much protection. Although the number of casualties wasn't too high, there were still about 300 to 400 people. Most of them were injured, especially in the lower 3 parts of the army, which were below the waist. The Great Xia army fell into chaos before they even reached the bottom of the city wall. After a full 2 hours, the Great Xia army continued to advance. At this time, the people at the front with good eyesight could clearly see what was written on the white cloth on the city wall. However, something that Rinpoche didn't expect happened. The Great Xia army didn't seem to see it and didn't panic at all. Chapter 361. Is the burial done? Rinpoche raised his head, looked at the Great Xia barracks not far away, and asked softly, My lord, it's done. Let's go. Rinpoche led everyone away with a wave of his hand, leaving behind only a landmine. Rinpoche buried another mortar in the distance. Then he set up the mortar in another location and fired at the eastern and northern barracks of the enemy. After that, he packed up and returned to the city to sleep. Rinpoche and the rest went back to sleep, but Great Xia was almost tormented to death. In the middle of the night, there was a sudden explosion in the barracks. Furthermore, it landed in between a few tents. Not to mention the number of casualties, Great Xia thought that Dayo had come to raid their barracks again. One after another, the soldiers of Great Xia grabbed their weapons and rushed out. After receiving it, he waited for a long time before realizing that the other party had only fired one shell. After waiting for an hour, everyone in the camp believed that the other party wouldn't come again, so they went back to sleep. Early the next morning, Great Xia stepped on a landmine the moment they got into formation. Everyone immediately put their eyes on the ground and carefully moved forward. They only heaved a sigh of relief when they realized that there was nothing wrong after walking for 100 meters. Before they could even exhale, they were suppressed by another explosion. The third day, there was a river north of the Great Xia barracks. The river was 100 meters wide, and the current was rather rapid. Usually, the Great Xia soldiers would collect water from this river for daily use. This place wasn't far from the barracks. In the past, this place was considered safe as the aboriginals were all holed up in Liao City. Thus, everyone could come here to collect water without worry. One morning, there were 2 explosions by the river. Then, a group of servants shouted loudly and carried a dozen or so people back. A few of them could not be saved, and the rest were all covered in blood. On the 4th day, when the people of Great Xia left the camp, they felt that there was something under their feet. They wanted to stop for half a day after every step they took. At this moment, they finally understood what "watch your step" meant. Although most of the soldiers were illiterate, there were always some who could read. That day, the words on the white cloth hanging on the city wall attracted a lot of people's attention. After the soldiers returned to camp that night, the news spread throughout the camp. In addition, there would be explosions in a certain place every day. After a few days, the soldiers of Great Xia began to walk with caution. However, there were no explosions that day, and the soldiers heaved a sigh of relief when they attacked the city. It didn't matter if it was a real fight, but not knowing when something would suddenly jump up and explode under their feet would always make them a little nervous. They are at their wits' end, Wu Shengho said in the Great Xia barracks with a relaxed look on his face. How does the great general know? The scholar put on a studious pose. Apart from that night's attack, they only engaged in small skirmishes after that. They used less and less of those powerful weapons. Although there was something that would explode when buried in the ground, there weren't many of them. A few days ago, they encountered 10 of them in each direction, but in the last 2 days, there were fewer and fewer. Today, there wasn't even one. Moreover, no matter where they got this thing from, with the power and precision of this weapon, it would definitely require a skilled craftsman to make it, and there wouldn't be too many of them. It can be used to harass or attack a small number of troops, but when the 2 armies are facing each other, it can only hurt a few more people and delay the attack. Wu Shengho stated his judgment, and the scholar immediately flattered him. Great General is brilliant. Wu Shengho waved his hand. You and I have known each other for many years, so you don't have to do this. Whatever I can think of, you can too. If they used more weapons at the beginning, I would have a headache. But now, it seems that there aren't many of them, so I don't have to worry too much. Great General, don't forget that the other party has a weapon that can spit out countless small iron balls. That weapon is slightly more powerful than the others, and even a high-level earthwheel expert would find it difficult to escape. The more powerful the weapon, the greater the restrictions, Wu Shengho said resolutely. The iron balls that the other party spit out are specially manufactured and of excellent quality. Even the skilled craftsmen of Great Xia would need a lot of time to make them. The speed of this weapon is also very fast, and a few can be shot out in an instant. Using this kind of weapon consumes a lot of specially made iron balls. From what I can see, the other party took a long time to accumulate so many. After using it a few times, even if there are more, there won't be many left. What the great general said is right. At this moment, Rinpochian was looking at a house in Shanghai. He was accompanied by a lady in her 30s. She wore glasses and looked very professional. She spoke very professionally, but Rinpochian felt that she was sizing him up. This house was found by Rinpochian's assistant, Shen Feng. It was 2.5 stories, about 600 square meters, 4 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and 2 bathrooms. The second floor had a large balcony and a garden of more than 1,000 square meters. There were 2 swimming pools in the garden and indoors, and a semi-subterranean garage. Upon seeing this house, Rinpoche's first thought was to bring the Empress here to swim. The Empress definitely wouldn't go to crowded places by the sea, but there was still a possibility of swimming here. In addition, there were many rooms, and the garage was also big. In the future, weapons and ammunition could be directly stored in this house, which was very convenient. Furthermore, this house was exquisitely renovated. Even though the style wasn't to his liking, it wasn't to his dislike either. The best thing was that he could move in just by carrying his luggage. The only thing that Rinpoche didn't like was that it was too deserted. The palace was deserted enough, and there were more houses than people. Most of the time, he was alone in such a big house. It was so boring. Is it possible to connect all the rooms? I live alone, and I always feel that there are people in the other rooms. I lack a sense of security. If you can connect all the rooms and have a panoramic view, this house won't have any shortcomings, Rinpoche said sincerely. After hearing Rinpoche's words, the real estate agent's expression immediately froze. Why do I feel that there are people in the other rooms? Are there people or ghosts? Lack a sense of security? Are you here to cause trouble? Sir, the feng shui here is excellent, and there is absolutely no problem. Furthermore, I can introduce you to a master who is very famous in Shanghai. You don't have to worry about these things. I didn't mean it that way. Rinpoche waved his hand lightly. It's a psychological effect. Do you understand? I lack a sense of security, and I like to stay in a place with a panoramic view. There are so many rooms here, and I feel uncomfortable. If you want to hire a psychiatrist, it might be better for me to hire a psychiatrist. If not for the fact that he didn't look like an ordinary person, that woman would have thrown the book in her hand on his face. If you don't like big houses, why are you looking at villas? Rinpoche had been in Dayo's court for a long time and had dealings with the higher-ups in the country. He naturally had an imposing manner that this woman didn't dare to offend. Sir, perhaps you can look at other houses? Our company has many houses that are suitable for someone of your status. The woman changed the topic. Status? Rinpoche smiled kindly at her, like a big bad wolf seeing Little Red Riding Hood. What do you think of my status? Not an ordinary person. The woman made a turn and smiled respectfully. Would an ordinary person come to look at a villa worth more than 30 million yuan? However, she didn't dare to guess his identity. Although she felt that he was a rich man, she might offend him if she guessed wrongly. If he was narrow-minded, she would be in big trouble. Most importantly, Rinpoche had an imposing manner that made her feel pressured. She also felt that this person beside her was somewhat dangerous. Good taste. Rinpoche gave a thumbs up and laughed heartily. This one, Rinpoche said as he clapped his hands. The woman's heart trembled when she heard this. A house worth more than 30 million yuan was bought just like that? She quickly calculated how much commission she could get this time. Wait a minute. Rinpoche gestured to her again. Then, he called Yang Sin, Director Yang. Mr. Ren, what's the matter? Yang Sin trembled a little when he heard Rinpoche's call. Recently, he had been dealing with Rinpoche every 3 to 5 days. After hearing Rinpoche talk about nuclear bombs, white phosphorus bombs, and napalm bombs from time to time, he didn't want to answer Rinpoche's call anymore. My house has been flooded and I am homeless now. I happened to look at a house. It's not expensive and only costs about 40 million yuan. However, I don't have enough money in my pocket. I would like to ask you for a loan of 50 million yuan, together with the renovation fee. Yang Sen was speechless. Director Yang can't handle such a small matter, can you? This time, I have brought something good for you. Rinpoche laughed. Wait a minute, let me ask for instructions. Yang Sen hung up the phone after he finished speaking. Rinpoche hummed a tune. Actually, he hadn't spent much money recently. He still had about 100 million yuan left with the loan from the nation and his original 20 million yuan. However, if someone else could foot the bill, why should he fork out his own money? Chapter 362. The things that Rinpoche brought back this time were actually the products of poverty. They were bone arrows used by the winged cavalry. As Dayo couldn't afford to use iron arrowheads, these bone arrows were very hard and stable. There were many arrows made from these bones when hunting in the mountains. When Rinpoche came back, he brought a few with him to the laboratory on Earth. Actually, he had another idea, which he only thought of when he came back. He wanted to bring back the corpse of an earthwheel expert. Presumably, he would be able to obtain a lot of important things from their corpses, including directions for training. This was something that he needed. After understanding the progress of the laboratory, he realized that there wasn't much progress on the saber. However, he heard another piece of news. Some of the people on Earth were practicing the martial arts he brought back, and the fastest ones had already reached the man-will level. Even he was surprised by this speed. However, it wasn't that difficult to understand after thinking about it. The so-called man-will level was when the body had reached a certain level of training and blood essence was transformed into qi. Some of the elite soldiers and even martial artists on Earth shouldn't be far from this step. There were definitely many such elites among the people in China who chose to practice martial arts. Therefore, it wasn't impossible for them to reach the man-will level in a short period of time with sufficient logistical support. Fortunately, he never felt that the people on Earth were a threat. Therefore, he was happy to see it happen. The more he analyzed and understood martial arts through modern technology, the more helpful it would be for him. 2 days later, that villa became Rinpoche's. There were 4 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, 2 swimming pools, and a huge garage. Furthermore, the forest park was next to it, and the air was good. He didn't have to smell the pungent and turbid air every time he came back. Recently, Rinpoche's nose had been itching, and he suspected that he was going to get rhinitis. Rinpoche couldn't help but shudder at the thought of his mucus hanging from his nose every day. That scene was simply unbearable. To Rinpoche, the greatest significance was that he would have a place to store his firearms in the future. Secondly, he might be able to tempt the Empress to swim. Swimming pool, sunshine, bikini, and just thinking about it made him a little excited. As for the 1,800 square meters of garden, he didn't really care about it. The garden in the palace was much bigger than this. This place is too spacious, Rinpoche said as he walked. Behind him was Shun Feng, who was wearing unisex clothes. Change this place into a supermarket. Rinpoche opened a door and said to Shun Feng. Although Shun Feng was usually expressionless, she was a little shocked when she heard this request. Setting up a supermarket in your own villa, your brain circuit is too strange. The surrounding shelves are filled with all kinds of snacks, candies, chocolates, popcorn, potato chips, yam tablets. There are 2 freezers in the middle for all kinds of ice cream. Shen Feng took out a recording pen and recorded everything that Rinpoche said. Her face was bright and full of expression. Actually, when I was young, my biggest wish was to open a supermarket at home. Rinpoche couldn't help but reminisce about his lost childhood. My second wish is to open a barbecue shop, so prepare the barbecue equipment for me as well. Boss, what should we do with the things here? Shen Feng asked as she pointed at the cabinet, bed, desk, and chair in the room. If you like it, you can take it. If not, you can dispose of it. Also, get me a housekeeper to clean the place once a day, including the pool. The garage and my bedroom are off limits unless I let you. Lastly, when I'm not around and there's no one here, will there be any problems? Rinpoche asked after thinking for a while. The security here is very good, so don't worry, boss, Shen Feng immediately replied. With Rinpoche's identity, even if he lived in the most chaotic place, there would be people who would make the security there very good. That's good. Rinpoche nodded. He was well aware of Shen Feng's identity and had already guessed it during the recruitment. When he was recruiting, 11 out of the 10 people who were sent to him were sent by certain departments. They wouldn't let go of this opportunity. That night, a truck arrived at Rinpoche's new villa and moved a few boxes into his garage. Rinpoche opened the boxes and checked them before tying them up again and bringing them back to Dayo. The next morning, when the Great Xia army was attacking the city, they saw that banners with words were hung on the city wall again. The Great Xia army at the front didn't pay much attention to it. The casualties these few days had already shown that very few of those who rushed up the city wall survived. If it weren't for the fact that these Great Xia soldiers were well trained and that there was a law enforcement team behind them, they would have already started to flee. Even so, there were people who took advantage of the night to escape over the past 2 days. However, they ended up being hung on the pillars as a warning to the public. Under such circumstances, it was better for them to seize the last moment to look at the place where they were about to be buried than to care about what was written on that piece of paper. Believe in Dafu, it can save my life. Dafu must ensure that I come down from the city wall alive, a soldier muttered while holding his amulet in his hand. What's the use of believing in that? I'm afraid that we won't be able to come down alive today. A soldier who was missing an ear sighed. He was the first batch of soldiers to attack the city today. If we were attacking other places, even if we climbed up the city wall, there would still be a chance to retreat or directly attack the city wall when the situation isn't good. There would always be hope. However, this group of barbarians basically won't be able to come down alive after going up. Another soldier's voice wasn't loud, and only 2 or 3 people around him could hear him clearly. His words also represented the words of the others. If there was some hope in attacking other places, there was no hope at all in Liao City. Perhaps Liao City would be attacked in a few days, but not today. At the very least, Liao City's defense hadn't weakened since yesterday. What they cared about was that they were going to die in battle on this piece of land in a while. Some officers were curious about what was written on the white cloth on the city wall. When the distance was close enough, the few literate people could finally see the words on it. Be careful of the top. Previously, they were careful of the bottom. This time, they were careful of the top? Even without Rinpoche's reminder, everyone knew to be careful, but it was useless to be careful. Fortunately, the other party's weapons had been used less and less recently. Wu Shengho wasn't the only one who felt that those strange weapons in Liao City were about to be used up. In less than 15 minutes, Wu Shengho received the news. Be careful of the top? Subconsciously, he thought of the things that had fallen from the sky and exploded. They are preparing to take out their last weapons. Wu Shengho laughed. Since the other party didn't use them yesterday, he knew that they didn't have much left. Today's banner was just to dazzle people's eyes. Continue to attack the city and get the master archers ready. Wu Shengho waved his hand. Following his order, a loud and clear howl sounded from the Great Xia army. Kill, kill, kill. The Great Xia soldiers raised their spears and shouted 3 times. Then they carried the newly made ladder up the city. Watch carefully how to use this little thing. Rinpoche held a small melon in his hand. He demonstrated it to the more than 20 winged cavalry warriors around him. First, hold down the handle here and then pull out the ring. Remember, the ring must be pulled out and the handle must be held down. In a while, if anything goes wrong, I will let him know what it means to flutter in the wind. If he doesn't die, I will strip him naked and hang him in the city. I will get someone to draw an elephant for him and hang him there until the Great Xia army retreats. Then, I will pull him back to Lan City and hang him on top of the city wall. If you want to show off your size, you can consider doing it wrong on purpose. The winged cavalry warriors looked at Rinpoche and smirked. After the ring is pulled out, continue to hold down the handle and throw it toward the place where there are a lot of enemy soldiers. Rinpoche continued to speak and threw the small melon down the city wall. It was originally high up, and he had great strength. He threw it 100 meters away and happened to fall under the feet of a group of Great Xia soldiers who were protecting the ladder and rushing up. Boom! A group of people had just run over with the ladder. Following the explosion, half of them fell down, and many of the remaining people were also injured. The 82-2 grenade weighed 260 grams, which was 250 kilograms. It contained 62 grams of high explosives and 1,600 small steel balls with a diameter of 3 millimeters. The shell of the grenade could also form more than 330 0.3-gram fragments with a destructive radius of 6 meters. Although the power of the explosives wasn't strong enough, the number of fragments and small steel balls that exploded at an initial speed of 1,400 meters was enough to turn the surrounding people into sieves and cause a large number of casualties. This time, Rinpoche brought a total of 600 of these grenades, 30 60mm anti-personnel incendiary shells, and 30 bouncing mines. At present, Rinpoche had 600 grenades, 42 incendiary shells, and 38 bouncing mines. Each person will take 10 grenades and use them when the enemy attacks in a group. This will immediately disrupt the momentum of the enemy's attack. After Rinpoche gave his instructions, more than 20 winged cavalry warriors used their shadowless hands like more than 20,000 armed guanyin. In the blink of an eye, 2 boxes were emptied. Then they spread their legs and disappeared. Chapter 363. Great Xia had just launched their attack and arrived at the foot of the city wall when they were showered with muskmelons. Dozens of grenades were thrown, and more than half of the attacking troops collapsed. There were all kinds of screams below the city wall. Even though some of the Great Xia soldiers didn't die, their bodies were like sieves, and they probably wouldn't live for long. Some of them were slightly better off and had some injuries on their bodies. Believe in Dafu, protect the whole family, and obtain eternal life. A Great Xia soldier fell to the ground with one hand holding the amulet on his chest. His eyes were filled with ecstasy. His injuries weren't light or serious. There were many wounds on his body, but they weren't in vital areas. He definitely wouldn't be able to fight on the battlefield, but he wouldn't leave behind too much of a problem. After recuperating for 10 days to half a month, he would be a good man again. In the largest tent of the Great Xia barracks, Wu Shengho smashed the table in front of him with an ashen face. Just yesterday, he said that the other party had exhausted their limited tricks. Just now, he said that the other party didn't have any new tricks, but the other party immediately took out a new type of weapon. Although the method of killing was very similar, from the soldier's description, it was different from the previous one. It was much smaller and less powerful. There were more people on the battlefield, but fewer people died. However, there were hundreds of injured soldiers. Now, there were more than 3,000 injured soldiers in the barracks. All of them were pierced by the shrapnel of the other party's weapon, and many soldiers were infected. Now, Wu Shengho hoped that when the rations were delivered, he would be able to bring these injured soldiers back. Leaving them here would affect the morale. Continue to attack. I want to see how many they have. Wu Shengho gritted his teeth. He didn't believe that the other party still had many such exquisite weapons. In addition, get the scouts to pay attention to the south. If the convoy comes over, inform me immediately. Very soon, the sounds of fighting and weapons colliding could be heard from Liao City. However, every time the Great Xia soldiers reached a certain level, a few winged cavalry warriors would throw a wave of grenades down to interrupt the subsequent attacks. Then they would slowly clear up the enemy troops on the city wall. After a few times of this, the Great Xia soldiers almost vomited blood. How was this a siege? It was simply a suicide mission. Of course, such a consumption wasn't small. Before evening, the 300 grenades were used up. Yun Nation, Qingfeng City. Ziheng, I am irreconcilable with the Xia kingdom. After a strong man entered the inn with Gu Ziheng, he began to curse with a sullen face. Rinpoche was very familiar with these two men as they were the shopkeepers of the caravans that he learned marketing from. Not bad. You guys are lucky to be able to come back, said another middle-aged man, Gu Ziheng. My things and money are all gone. I only brought back 2,000 taels of gold ingots. If I didn't run fast enough, I wouldn't even have brought these back. The person who spoke was called Tang Feng, and he was the shopkeeper of the merchant caravan that went to Great Xia previously. When Great Xia and the Aboriginals were at war, he didn't receive any news. However, he soon felt that something was amiss. One night, he discovered that someone was following him, and he immediately captured that person. After finding out that it was someone from the military, he immediately felt that something was amiss. Out of Xia and Rinaf. Of the soldiers of Xia with the caravans of. However, before he could escape the city, the soldiers from the military caught up with him. Tang Feng and his subordinates fought a great battle with the soldiers of the military. In the end, out of more than 50 subordinates, only about 20 people followed him from the border between Great Xia and the Yun Nation to the Yun Nation and found Gu Ziheng. Speaking of which, he also felt guilty. If he hadn't been more vigilant after traveling all these years, he probably wouldn't have been able to return this time. Unfortunately, at least 200,000 taels of silver had been lost. The 2,000 taels of gold ingots he had brought back was equivalent to 20,000 taels of silver. In other words, he had only brought back 1/10 of what he had brought back. But at that time, they only had this amount of gold on hand. The rest of the silver was too much. If they wanted to take the silver with them, they wouldn't be able to run back. When Her Majesty fights back, you can naturally take it back even more aggressively, Gu Ziheng said while taking a sip of the tea leaves. How's the situation in the Yun Nation? Tang Feng asked. I'm more familiar with this place than you are. In my opinion, they will quarrel for a while. Gu Ziheng smiled. The Yun Nation was somewhat different from Great Xia and Deyo. The Yun Nation was more like an aggregation of all the cities. The ruling power of the imperial court was relatively low. On the other hand, the cities in the Yun Nation were governed by warlords. Each warlord had the power to decide life and death within the boundaries of the city. If the imperial court wanted to send orders to their subordinates, the warlords would have to agree to it. Therefore, when something happened, the Yun Nation's response was the slowest. We will rest for a day before setting off. Be careful too, Tang Feng reminded him. Understood. After you leave, I will move to another place. The warlords here are irritable and impulsive. Who knows what they will do? If it weren't for the prosperity of this place, I wouldn't have stayed here. Now that the situation is chaotic, I have to make some preparations. You rest first. I will go exchange for some gold so that it will be easier to take away if something happens. After Gu Ziheng finished speaking, he placed the teacup on the table and pushed the door open. One day later, Gu Ziheng sent Tang Feng off. As soon as he returned to the inn, he found that it was surrounded. After discovering him, they came to greet him. Everyone, what's the matter? Gu Ziheng brought a few tall and strong subordinates with him. Most importantly, Gu Ziheng himself was at the earthwheel level and his subordinates were at the manwheel level. This made the soldiers more or less cautious. Are you merchants from Deyo? The warlord heard that you brought some rare treasures this time and wants to see them, one of the soldiers said. It's just a meeting. Is there a need for so many people? Gu Ziheng looked at the hundreds of people surrounding the inn. There were a few people standing not far away, all of whom were at the earthwheel level. His face was gloomy. Seeing this posture, he understood what was going on. If he still couldn't tell, he would be a fool. He was afraid that Her Majesty was at war with Great Xia. The Yun Nation was also restless. This warlord felt that they were pushovers and wanted to take them down first so that he could make a windfall. The other party probably didn't just have this plan today. When Ren Baqian exchanged for gold yesterday, he probably sensed their intention to leave and decided to make a move. Recently, there have been more pickpockets in the city. Her Majesty is afraid that you will encounter them with your rare treasures, so she specially asked us to escort you, the soldier said. Escort my A***. Gu Ziheng scolded. He grabbed the soldier's chest and forcefully threw him to the side. The soldier broke through the wall and fell in. He let out a long whistle to inform the others. Courting death. Upon seeing Gu Ziheng's actions, a swordsman in a green robe who was standing not far away said coldly. He pulled out a long sword from his back, appeared above Gu Ziheng's head in a flash, and stabbed down with his sword. F***CKU. Gu Ziheng continued to scold. He dodged the long sword and forced the swordsman to retreat with a punch. He took out a handful of silver fragments and threw them out. These silver fragments didn't need to be aimed at all. They scattered as soon as they were thrown. With Ren Baqian's strength, if the silver fragments were to be smashed, they would probably be seriously injured. Behind him, several of his subordinates clashed with the city guards. Boss, catch the weapon. A few burly men jumped out of the inn and fought with the city guards. One of them threw a mace that was as tall as a human over. Stop fighting. Pack up your things, bring the gold, and follow me to kill our way out. Gu Ziheng scolded loudly. He took the mace and swung it around in a circle. The 3 earthwheel experts that surrounded him were all forced to retreat. As for the city guards, they were directly plastered to the wall with blood all over their bodies. Chapter 364. Are these the mirrors and cups that the barbarians brought? A middle-aged man with a long beard was playing with a glass cup. There was a silver mirror on the table next to him. Yes, sir. I don't quite believe that those barbarians could come up with these things, the middle-aged man said doubtfully. They belong to Sir now. Not bad. Are there any other gains? There are 270,000 taels of silver. There are 17 mirrors and 42 cups like this. Send them to the treasury. The middle-aged man smiled. According to the prices that the aboriginals had been selling these things for, they were worth another 700,000 taels. In total, there was 1,000,000 taels of silver, which could be used to equip at least 20,000 soldiers. Sir, will those barbarians take revenge? What's there to be afraid of? They can't even take care of themselves right now. If they are not careful, they might even destroy the country. Furthermore, the order has been given to dispatch troops within the next few days. Our city will also dispatch 10,000 soldiers. The middle-aged man waved his hand nonchalantly. With this 1,000,000 taels of silver, even if the 10,000 soldiers were to be lost, they could easily be replenished. I see. If Great Xia and the Yun nation join forces to attack, I'm afraid those barbarians won't be able to hold on for long. The subordinate exclaimed. Boom! At night, an explosion suddenly occurred in a certain area of the Great Xia camp. Some of the surrounding tents were directly torn open. Some of the soldiers in the tents had already died in their sleep. Some of the injured were awakened from their sleep and groaned in pain after feeling the severe pain. The soldiers in the surrounding tents hurriedly ran out and helped to drag the corpses away. They then carried the injured to the casualty barracks before rushing back to their tents to get dressed and lie down. However, before they could fall asleep, they heard another explosion in the distance. However, these soldiers acted as if they hadn't heard it and went back to sleep. At first, they were nervous, but after a long time, they got used to it. Over the past few days, there would be several explosions every night. They would go out to take a look if they were nearby and pretend that they didn't hear anything if they were further away. They slept and dreamed. Wu Shengho walked out of his tent with an ugly expression in the early morning. Wu Shengho's expression hadn't been good for the past few days. Sullen. He had been in the army for decades and had never fought such a sullen battle. He had known for a long time that it would be difficult to fight Dayo and had even planned for it for 20 years. How many 20 years does a man have in his life? He had planned for an uncertain event for 20 years. From this, one could see his temperament. No matter how strong the ancient race was, he was prepared and confident that he would be able to obtain victory in this war. As long as time dragged on, the aboriginals would lose all their land in the north, the Yun nation would send out their troops, the south would rebel, and Great Xia would send new recruits to the front lines. That would be the time when the aboriginal barbarians would be chased back to the mountains. The development of the war from the beginning was indeed within his expectations. However, in the past 20 days, everything had changed. It was unknown where the other party had gotten his hands on some completely unfamiliar weapons, but they were rather powerful, especially when used against ordinary soldiers on the battlefield. A small object thrown on the side of the road that no one would notice could cause hundreds or even dozens of casualties. In the beginning, he thought that the other party did not have much and would soon run out of them. However, the other party seemed to have an endless supply of items. He used one after another, changing his style from time to time. On the battlefield, in the barracks, regardless of whether it was day or night, thunderous explosions could always be heard. Whether it was on the battlefield or when they were resting or when they were fetching water for cooking, they would encounter such explosions from time to time. Over the past few days, everyone in the barracks was filled with tension. This was especially true during the attack. Recently, the other party would always throw a small exploding ball after the number of troops had reached a certain level. This would interrupt the subsequent attacks and then kill all the soldiers at the front lines before the reinforcements could arrive. Over the past few days, the attacks were not effective at all. The number of casualties on his side was increasing, but the casualties of the other party were decreasing. Now, every time he heard those explosions during an attack, he knew that the rhythm of the siege had been disrupted again. He no longer had the fluency that he used to have when he commanded the troops to attack. His attacking rhythm was interrupted every now and then, causing him to feel irritated and suffocated. On this battlefield, the morale of the army was getting lower and lower, which was also something that worried him. If the other party did not have those strange weapons, even if the attack was temporarily thwarted, the morale would not have dropped so quickly. But now, they had to be careful when they walked and had to look up at the sky when they attacked. Even many of the soldiers had begun to feel at a loss. The reason why he was persevering now was to at least achieve the strategic intention of this war. He had to wait for the two armies that had penetrated deep into Dayo to achieve the desired goal. At the same time, he was unwilling to admit defeat and wanted to see how many more of those strange weapons the other party had. He didn't believe that the other party would never run out of them. Wu Shengho was in a bad mood, but Rinpochen was in a good mood. Every night, he would plant a few mines outside and fire 2 cannons at the enemy's barracks from the top of the city wall. Seeing how the great Xia soldiers would lower their heads and raise their heads every day when they went out to battle, Rinpochen felt satisfied. Especially now, the soldiers in the city almost regarded him as a god. Even though his individual strength wasn't strong, those messy weapons of his had indeed been very useful during the defense of the city. At present, there were still 80,000 great Xia soldiers who could fight outside the city. Under the situation where half of their soldiers were injured or dead, the great Xia soldiers still had no intention of retreating. Rinpochen felt that they would not give up until they saw the end of the road. The situation inside the city wasn't too good. After sending out 300 winged cavalry warriors to intercept the other party's supply team, there were still 800 winged cavalry warriors and 3,000 soldiers left in the city. There were only 3,800 soldiers in total. Some of the commoners who had participated in the defense before the Empress arrived had been mobilized to go up the city wall to assist. However, Rinpochen wasn't too worried. These commoners had been tempered by the flames of war and only lacked some military knowledge to become a new force. Whether it was in terms of strength or individual bravery, they weren't inferior to the army. In addition, there were 2 other great Xia armies wreaking havoc within the borders of Dayo. One of them only had about 80,000 soldiers. When Rinpochen first arrived in Liao City, he had already destroyed many strongholds. It wasn't until all the strongholds gathered in the city that the casualties started to decrease. However, in addition to that army, there was another 100,000 soldiers doing the same thing. After not having any gains in the wilderness, these 2 armies had already begun to attack the cities. Recently, 2 cities had already been breached. There were many casualties in the cities, but the casualties of those 2 armies weren't light either. According to Rinpochen's plan, after deploying over 3,000 soldiers to guard the city and forming a militia, it would be difficult for them to form a fighting force in a short period of time. Even if their individual strength was much higher than that of the great Xia soldiers, they still couldn't avoid the fate of breaching the city walls. In the past few days, 3 cities had already been breached, and the casualties were no less than 40,000. It had to be said that the individual combat strength of the Aboriginal commoners was enough to be proud of the fact that a group of militia and commoners caused 60,000 casualties in the face of the elite Great Xia soldiers. This was also the reason why Great Xia couldn't pursue and kill those commoners who escaped after the city was breached. The losses were too great. At the same time, 3,500 soldiers were on standby, ready to rendezvous with the reinforcements from the Protectorate of the South and give the 120,000 Great Xia soldiers a fatal blow. The reinforcements would be able to rendezvous with the 3,500 soldiers in 7 days. 85,000 against 120,000. Even if Great Xia won, the remaining soldiers wouldn't be able to do anything other than withdraw. Furthermore, Great Xia might not necessarily win. Rinpochen strolled to the side hall of the city commander's residence. The 2 radio stations were there, and the other radio station had been taken away by the winged cavalry that went out to intercept the Great Xia soldiers. Any news? Rinpochen went in and asked. Not yet. The Empress and Li Qianqiu's guards were in charge of the operator in the side hall. Rinpochen nodded. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he heard a rustling sound coming from the radio station. Following which, a voice said, "This is the Protectorate of the Northeast. Is Principal Ren around? Looking for me?" Rinpochen was slightly puzzled. He walked back to the radio station and asked, "Yes, I am. What's the matter?" Sir, I'm Tang Feng. The person in front of the radio station had changed. Aren't you in Great Xia? I was still wondering if you had made it back. I didn't expect you to be in the Protectorate of the Northeast. Ren Baqian was telling the truth. He had really thought about the situation with the caravan, but unfortunately, it was difficult to transmit messages. At that time, he hadn't brought back the radio station. Although the Yabao could be used, it was expensive and was only used to transmit messages between cities. Later on, he could only hope that they were lucky enough to return safely with his money. Now that the supply of medicinal herbs had been cut off, the Empress was bankrupt, and her treasury was only left with the money to maintain the palace and the guards. Sir, not only am I back, but even old Gu is back. However, he is still bedridden. I'm afraid he won't be able to wake up for at least half a month, Tang Feng said. Ren Baqian frowned. Old Gu was Gu Ziheng, and he should be in Yun City now. Even he had gone to the Protectorate of the Northeast. What had happened? One had to know that after the war with Great Xia, he knew that his mirror and glass cup were no longer in Great Xia. He only hoped that the Yun nation would bring him some silver taels. One had to know that without money, there would be no medicine. Without medicine, he wouldn't be able to level up. If he couldn't level up, he wouldn't be able to marry the Empress. If he couldn't marry the Empress, it would be more serious. Was he supposed to become a great sorcerer? Sir, I didn't even bring the money back. It was robbed. I only brought back 2,000 taels of gold from Great Xia. The rest were robbed. Old Gu was slightly better than me and barely managed to escape with 5,000 taels of gold. The rest of the goods and silver were robbed by warlord Qingfeng. Ren Baqian's eyes widened when he heard this. He was counting on this money to train, and now it was actually robbed? The metal chain crawled out from his head, slithered to the ground, wrapped around the stool next to him, and then raised it up high. Everyone in the side hall couldn't be bothered to look at Ren Baqian's emoticons anymore. All of them were looking at the metal chain swaggering around the stool and exclaiming in admiration. How much was robbed? Ren Baqian squeezed out a few words from between his teeth. He didn't care about the money that wasn't sold, but the money that was sold was his hard-earned money. It was actually robbed? This was intolerable. About 500,000 taels. Tang Feng said a number that made everyone shudder with fear. This was 1/14 of Dayo's annual income and the Empress's income for 4 years. Say it again, who robbed it? Ren Baqian gritted his teeth and asked. I escaped from Great Xia's Juruo city, and the one who robbed it was the military there. Old Gu escaped from Yunguiqing's Feng city, and the one who robbed it was the warlord of Qingfeng city. After hearing this, Ren Baqian turned around and walked away, dragging a stool behind him. The sound of the stool bumping against the ground didn't attract Ren Baqian's attention at all. Your Majesty, your money has been robbed. The Empress, who was watching a television series and eating popcorn, raised her head and was somewhat puzzled. A total of 1 million taels. Ren Baqian stretched out a finger. The Empress's eyes widened all of a sudden. It's those mirrors and glasses that I asked the caravan to bring over previously. I wanted to sell them to replenish the imperial treasury. A total of 1 million taels were robbed by the warlord of Yunguiqing. Boom! The table in front of the Empress was smashed into pieces. Great Xia also robbed a portion of it. However, the Empress obviously didn't notice his last sentence. Her attention was completely attracted by the words 1 million taels to replenish the imperial treasury and warlord of Qingfeng city. He actually dared to? The Empress's hair stood on end as she spat out each word through gritted teeth. Your Majesty, it seems like the Yun nation is going to send troops. Ren Baqian first talked about serious matters. From this incident, it could be seen that the Yun nation had already made up its mind. Otherwise, how could a warlord be so bold? The Empress calmed down after hearing this, but it was still difficult to quell the anger in her heart. She had always been the one robbing others, but today she was actually being robbed? And it was even 1 million taels? How much could she do with 1 million taels? However, before dealing with the Yun nation, we can first send experts to deal with the warlord of Qingfeng city. This kind of person whose hands are full of the people's hard-earned money must be punished and his family property confiscated. It's too slow to deal with him after we destroy the Yun nation. 10,000 years is too long, and we can only seize every minute. Renbachian raised his fist and exerted force. Fighting a war is one thing, but I can't tolerate the fact that you stole my money. As for Great Xia, I'll settle this score later. After I destroy the Great Xia army, I want all the rats in the national treasury to come out with tears in their eyes. Exterminate his entire family. The Empress immediately set the tone. Chapter 365. Sir Ren? Shi, who shouted a few times to wake Renbachian up from his daze. What's the matter? Renbachian turned to look at Shi Hu inquisitively. Renbachian had been in this state for a few days. Ever since he found out that his money was gone, he had been racking his brains every day, making people wonder if he had suffered too much. Her Majesty is looking for you. Renbachian nodded and hurried to the main hall of the city commander's residence. Your Majesty! Sir. When Renbachian arrived, he saw the Empress eating popcorn and sharing some with Li Qianqiu. Li Qianqiu was touched. It was indeed touching that the Empress was willing to share snacks with him, which could be considered as a form of love. Sir Ren, I want to launch another night attack on the Great Xia barracks. What do you think? Li Qianqiu asked. If it was just a night attack, there would be no need to inform Renbachian. However, with the current manpower, how much could they gain from a night attack? His goal was naturally to get something good from Renbachian. Great Xia has reinforcements again. The Empress added. 40,000 elite soldiers and 30,000 commoners are rushing here with a batch of rations. They will arrive in 2 days. These reinforcements were transferred from outside Tiesua Pass and Shun City. It had to be said that the value of a radio station in this world was too great. The various regions of Dayo could communicate with each other very smoothly. Just when there was a change in the other party's military strength, they could immediately detect it and make preparations before the other party arrived. I'm afraid a night attack won't be very effective. Renbachian immediately knew why Li Qianqiu wanted a night attack. Sir Ren, do you have any other ideas? Li Qianqiu asked. Let's observe the direction of the wind at night and try to poison them. Renbachian felt that it was time to throw out the 2 bottles of sarin gas. How do you do it? Li Qianqiu's eyes lit up. One had to know that Renbachian was most famous for using poison to kill tens of thousands of Great Xia soldiers. However, he had always felt that to kill so many people, he would need a lot of poison. Renbachian might not have it on hand, so he didn't ask further. Fortunately, Renbachian could always take out some other powerful weapons, which had played a great role in defending the city these days. Now, it wasn't just Li Qianqiu. The winged cavalry and the soldiers from the Protectorate of the Center all looked at Renbachian as though he was a treasure chest. They felt that he always had countless rare items, and no one knew where he got them from. Other than Renbachian, Li Qianqiu felt that it would be Her Majesty. Renbachian answered immediately. The airdrop had the largest surface area, and it also evaporated quickly. The only thing that made people worry was that they were on flat plains. The surroundings were empty, so how effective it would be. Previously, it was used in valleys, such as mountain streams, where the airflow was weaker than on plains. Even so, it was only able to poison 2,000 to 3,000 Great Xia soldiers to death at the White Dragon Stream, and this was when the other party was in a battle formation. Now that the Great Xia army had camped for several kilometers, it was hard to say how effective it would be in such a large area. Furthermore, there was wind on the plains, and the poisonous gas could be easily dispersed by the wind. Renbachian's target was actually a few key areas in the Great Xia barracks. It would be best if he could poison the chief commander of Great Xia to death. It was a pity that the other party's chief commander hadn't shown up for a long time. Otherwise, the Empress could directly kill him. At night, Renbachian sat in his room and fiddled with his drone. Shi Hu knocked on the door and said, "Sir, it's a southeast wind." Got it. Renbachian opened the door and asked someone to take the 2 drones. He took his bag and walked out, only to meet Li Qianqiu waiting outside. Sir Ren, it's all up to you this time. Li Qianqiu cupped his hands. As long as they used the poison to eliminate half of the soldiers outside, Liao City would still be able to defend itself. Otherwise, more than half of the soldiers would be injured, and the remaining 70,000 soldiers of Great Xia and the newly replenished 40,000 elite soldiers would be in danger. In the city, a group of people traveled north under the light of torches. Before long, they heard the Empress's voice coming from the walkie-talkie. "Are you guys ready?" "Yes, I hope there's good news." Ren Baqin smiled. Although this was what he said, he wasn't sure whether it would work or not. At the top of the city wall, Ren Baqin began to hang bottles on the drone. He used the same method as the last time. When the crane tilted, he would pull off the mouth of the bottle, and the liquid in the bottle would naturally spill down. As the drone rose up, Ren Baqin controlled it and flew toward the northern barracks. He went straight to the place where he had noticed a lot of guards when he used the drone to take a picture. Then he controlled the drone to turn the crane tilt and sprinkle the liquid sarin gas down. The liquid was dispersed by the wind in the air and evaporated when it was close to the ground. Li Qianqiu looked at Ren Baqin's control with envy in his eyes. This thing was really useful. Even if it wasn't used to release poison, it could be used to check the other party's deployment during a battle. Buzz buzz buzz. A few patrolling Great Xia soldiers looked up and didn't care anymore. During the day, there were many people and noises, and the drone wasn't easy to detect at an altitude of 600 meters. However, in the dead of night, the sound was easier to hear. Fortunately, the sky was dark, and even if they heard it, they wouldn't be able to see it. Instead, they would think that it was some kind of mosquito. A soldier turned over in his sleep. His breathing became heavier and heavier as if he couldn't breathe. Finally, he covered his throat with his hand but couldn't make a sound. Finally, he died painfully in his sleep. Not only him, but the soldiers in the surrounding tents were also in the same state. A patrolling general had just walked into a tent when he felt that something was wrong. The posture of the soldiers in the tent was too strange. All of them were covering their throats as if they were suffocating to death. "Enemy attack!" that general shouted. Soon after, he felt that he had difficulty breathing, a headache, and nausea. "Poison! Poison!" That general had a flash of inspiration. He quickly shouted, took out a ball of grass from his pocket, stuffed it into his mouth, and stumbled out of the tent. After running for dozens of meters, he fell to the ground. That general's shout alarmed many people. Many of them first rushed out of their tents with a blank look on their faces. When they felt suffocated and nauseous, they came back to their senses and took out a ball of grass from their pocket, stuffed it into their mouth, and shouted, "Enemy attack! Poison!" Before the attack, the Great Xia army was already on guard against being poisoned. After all, the entire 9 pavilions was destroyed in Great Xia, and there was a precedent where everyone in the army was poisoned to death. How could Great Xia not take precautions? Every soldier was warned about this when they were given a ball of wuma grass. At first, everyone took it to heart, but after such a long time without encountering the legendary poison that could poison thousands of people to death, these soldiers almost forgot about this matter. On this night, when they heard the shouting and saw the movements of the people around them, they hurriedly put the ball of grass into their mouths. "Great General, the statistics are done. A total of 1,700 people died, and all of them were poisoned with wuma grass. At present, there are no more casualties." Wu Shengho covered his head with one hand. If he hadn't discovered it early, he probably wouldn't have woken up. Fortunately, the other party's poisoning had been discovered. At this moment, hearing about the losses made him feel more at ease. This is their last resort, right? Wu Shengho snorted. Since they had already used poison, the other party probably didn't have any other tricks up their sleeves. "Inform everyone to stop fighting tomorrow and continue attacking the city the day after tomorrow," Wu Shengho instructed. At the same time, a long cry came from his stomach, causing his facial expression to change. Chapter 366. Ren Baqin looked at the photos taken by the drone, and his first reaction was that it was spectacular. It wasn't common to see tens of thousands of people suffering from diarrhea. Ren Baqin could smell it just from the photos. Then his face turned ugly. It was obvious that the poisonous gas from last night didn't have much of an impact on the Great Xia army. After all, there were 2 bottles of sarin gas, but other than seeing a large number of soldiers squatting in the wilderness with diarrhea, there weren't any corpses. He only saw a batch of corpses being buried outside the northern barracks. With just a glance, he knew that the number was much lower than expected. Combined with the fact that the entire northern barracks were suffering from diarrhea, Rinpoche had a bad guess. Did the other party find a way to cure the poison? Otherwise, even if the effect of the poisonous gas wasn't good, it could be explained by the wind. How could the tens of thousands of Great Xia soldiers suffering from diarrhea be explained? Unless the other party used some kind of drug that had mild side effects, it was impossible for tens of thousands of soldiers to suffer from diarrhea. Most importantly, he didn't see any panic in the northern barracks, which meant that his expectations had been dashed yesterday. The other party's commander was fine. Otherwise, the northern barracks wouldn't have done nothing besides suffer from diarrhea. If you attack now, the effect might be better than a night attack, Rinpoche said to Li Qianqiu with a slight frown. This was just a casual remark. The northern barracks were suffering from diarrhea, but the other 2 barracks were fine. If the other 2 battalions were to make dumplings out of the dumplings after they left, then this little bit of manpower would be used up. After placing the drone and the base station in the room, Rinpoche took out the 2 mortars. Bring 6 artillery shells, Rinpoche instructed Shirhu. Now there were only 30 artillery shells left. Rinpoche had already been meticulous about using them as little as possible and only using them when they were needed. However, seeing that the northern barracks were squatting peacefully, Rinpoche felt that he needed to discuss them a little. The people in this world were actually very particular about using the toilet. In the barracks, there would be a public toilet at regular intervals. There weren't any tents near the toilets, and it was completely open space. There were at least hundreds of such toilets in the Great Xia barracks. Now, tens of thousands of soldiers were squeezed outside these hundreds of toilets, and there were dozens of people waiting outside each toilet. Rinpoche's target was to randomly select a few within the range of the mortars. Then he adjusted the angle and inserted the artillery shells. Bang! Everyone in the Great Xia barracks was on the verge of collapsing from diarrhea. Even though the accompanying military doctors had brought along some medicine to treat diarrhea, they weren't prepared to treat tens of thousands of people. Yesterday, everyone was worried that they would be poisoned. Many people chewed the wuma grass and ate it, which made the diarrhea even worse. Many people had tightened their legs as soon as they walked out of the toilet, and they lined up outside while cursing. From time to time, he would hear curses like, "I'm going to shit my pants, hurry up and come out." Just as a group of people were anxiously waiting for the toilet, a tragedy happened. 2 black dots fell from the sky with a piercing sound. Everyone was busy clamping their legs together, so no one noticed it at all. Boom! Boom! The scene was too spectacular to be described in words. In 2 different places in the Great Xia barracks, the sea and the sky were the same color. Wang Hai! The faces of the people who rushed over after the explosion twitched. Boom! Boom! It was another yellow sea. After the 6 shells were fired, 4 out of 6 hit the target. After the bombardment ended, everyone in Great Xia was furious. It was fine if they attacked during normal times, but they attacked today and specifically at these few places. 4 out of 6 shells hit the toilet. Even a fool wouldn't believe that the other party didn't do it on purpose. A group of people scolded Rinpoche for being immoral, too immoral. When Wu Xingho, who was in the military tent, heard this result, his face twitched for a long time. Finally, his forehead twitched as he said, "They only have this little trick up their sleeves. In my opinion, they are already at their wits' end. Now, all they have to do is wait for the reinforcements to arrive tomorrow to break through Liao City in one fell swoop." After Rinpoche finished firing, he felt much better. In this world, there shouldn't be anything more comforting than blowing up the toilet while the enemy was queuing up to use the toilet. Rinpoche praised himself for being quick-witted. Then, he began to consider the plan that he had been thinking about for the past few days. Since Great Xia had a lot of soldiers, he would get rid of their commander. Since he didn't know where the commander was, he would let him expose his position. Or, he could think of a way to send the bombs to his side. As for how to do it, when Rinpoche returned to Earth, he gave Yang Sen a call and said, "Make me a bomb that doesn't weigh more than 320 kilograms. There must be 100 to 150 kilograms of Class B explosives in it. Besides the outer shell, the rest should be steel balls. It would be better if it's steel nails. I want it in 3 days." Impossible. 3 days is definitely not enough. I can ask for instructions and give you a batch of conventional equipment like grenades or mines. Boss still owes me a few conditions. Rinpoche immediately used his trump card. Conditions were only considered conditions when they were spoken out. Just like money, it was only money when it was spent. After these conditions were used up, he would just have to get 2 better secret manuals in exchange for a few more conditions. Let me ask first. Yang Sen immediately hung up and went to ask for instructions. After 20 minutes, he called again and said, "Although it's very difficult, I believe that with the technology and manufacturing capabilities of our military unit, we will definitely be able to make it. Make the outer shell according to me. It's best if it's the same proportion as a human or a little bigger." Yang Sen was slightly stunned. He had never seen or heard of anyone who wanted to make a bomb with a custom-made outer shell. Was this the so-called self-detonation? Get someone to your department. I'm going over now. Rinpoche hung up the phone and headed straight for Shanghai. When he arrived at the Messier 87 building and saw Yang Sen, Rinpoche put forward his requirements. That bomb has to be detonated by remote control, and there must be a listening device inside. Give me a set of listening devices that must be able to receive signals within 5 kilometers. At the same time, there must be a walkie-talkie and a loudspeaker inside, preferably at the head position. The outer shell of the bomb has to be the same as mine, and the hair has to be longer like this. As for the style of the clothes, I'll draw it for you. Rinpoche's plan was to make a humanoid bomb that looked exactly like the 7th Prince. With a statue of the 7th Prince, the other party couldn't possibly suspect that it was a bomb, right? Then he would use some methods to arouse the enemy's interest, wait for them to bring the bomb back, and detonate it right next to the commander. This would be the so-called express delivery bomb. More than 100 kilograms of Class B explosives. One had to know that a grenade contained no more than 50 grams of TNT. 1 kilogram of TNT could make 20 grenades, and 100 kilograms could make 2,000 grenades. Class B explosives were a mixture of RDX and TNT, and were more powerful than TNT. When 2,000 to 3,000 grenades were bundled together and exploded at the same time, the speed of the explosion was close to 8,000 meters per second. The shock wave and the shrapnel inside. As long as the enemy commander was within 30 meters of the bomb, even a peak earth wheel expert would be turned into a mosaic. As long as the enemy commander was within 10 meters of the bomb, even a spirit wheel expert. Rinpoche thought about it and felt that it should be able to kill a spirit wheel expert, right? After all, he didn't know much about spirit wheel experts. From what he heard and understood, it was really hard to say. After all, an intermediate earth wheel expert could cut bullets with a knife. This wasn't the first time he encountered such a situation with an anti-aircraft machine gun. He completely relied on the firing speed and power of the anti-aircraft machine gun to smash the enemy into pieces. Above the intermediate earth wheel was the advanced level, and above that was the earth embryo realm. Above that, one had to break through the heavenly gate to become a spirit wheel expert. Spirit wheel experts were also divided into various grades. As such, he wasn't very confident. However, even if the bomb couldn't kill the enemy, it definitely wouldn't be a problem to seriously injure them. Rinpoche was slightly distracted. When he came back to his senses and finished drawing on the paper, he slammed the table and said, "This is the style of the clothes." Yang Sen looked at the thing on the paper and was speechless. 3 words appeared in his mind. What is this? Chapter 367. 3 days later, Rinpoche looked at the human-shaped bomb that was 1 foot taller than him and had a shell made entirely of special steel. He took out his phone and took a selfie of himself. Although it wasn't exactly the same, he could tell that it was him. However, the hairstyle he wanted was a bun. What was on this statue's head? A carrot? Also, this outfit was different from what he had imagined. This bomb weighs 312 kilograms and contains 142 kilograms of high explosives as well as more than 20,000 fragments. It has a killing radius of 120 meters. In fact, at a distance of 200 meters, the fragments can still cause considerable damage to unprotected people, the military personnel explained. Although he didn't ask what he shouldn't, he was still very curious about this extremely strange bomb. Renbachien nodded his head as he listened. He was generally satisfied with this bomb. The most important thing was that there was a walkie-talkie, a miniature loudspeaker, and a listening device on its head, which completely met his requirements. He immediately asked someone to send the bomb to the garage of the villa and return to Dayo with it by the waist. First, he went outside to understand the situation. Although Great Xia was still attacking the city today, the intensity was much lower than before. It seemed that Great Xia was also waiting for reinforcements. It was estimated that the reinforcements would arrive in the afternoon and could only enter the battle tomorrow at the earliest. "Your Majesty, let's abandon the city," Li Qianqiu said with difficulty. If they wanted to abandon the city, this was the best time to do so. When Great Xia's reinforcements arrived, it would be really difficult to defend the city. With the addition of reinforcements, Great Xia's morale was even higher. There were only 3,000 defenders and nearly 1,000 winged cavalry warriors in the city. What do you think? The Empress turned to look at Renbachien. Although she didn't say anything else, everyone knew that she was definitely unwilling. No monarch would choose to abandon a city when he was personally leading the army into battle, especially for an expert like her who was proud and arrogant. Furthermore, if the 100,000 soldiers here were to head south, there would be a total of 300,000 enemies. Dayo's north would be completely undefended, and it would be equivalent to surrendering the city to someone else. "I think we can still give it a try," Renbachien said. The frown on the Empress's face immediately disappeared. No matter what, Renbachien always had a way. "Does Sir Ren have any other way?" Li Qianqiu asked hesitantly. The things that Renbachien brought were indeed very useful. If he still had a large number of weapons that he had used before, he might be able to hold on for a period of time. However, how long could he hold on for? If possible, he didn't want to abandon the city either. If they abandoned the city, Tiesua Pass and Shun City would be completely isolated. The entire northern region of Dayo would be completely at the mercy of the enemy. But if they couldn't defend it in the end, it would be better to retreat now and retreat to the mouth of the pot. That place was easy to defend and hard to attack. With the current army, they could still defend the mouth of the pot and then counterattack. "There's a way," Renbachien said. "Your Majesty, Lord Li, please follow me." Renbachien brought the two of them to his room, pointed at the statue, and said, "You can try using this." Li Qianqiu had a puzzled look on his face when he saw the metal statue inside. Using this statue to defend the city? The Empress looked at the statue, looked at Renbachien, and then looked at the statue again. Soon after, she suddenly recalled something, pointed at the statue, and said, "Xia, what was summer again? I can't remember, I didn't remember at that time." However, the Empress still remembered that he was the 7th Prince of Great Xia. "That's right, the statue of the 7th Prince of Great Xia." Renbachien nodded. Li Qianqiu had a look of understanding and said, "If it's the statue of the Great Xia Emperor, it might be of some use, but only a little use." If the statue of the Great Xia Emperor was erected on top of the city wall, would the enemy still dare to attack? Wouldn't they be afraid of being put in a difficult position? They probably wouldn't dare to. But even if they didn't dare to, it was just a statue and couldn't encircle the city wall. Moreover, who would remember this matter when the war started? "It's not what you think." Renbachien waved his hand. "What should we do then?" Li Qianqiu asked curiously. Boom. Renbachien made an explosion gesture with both hands. "Explosion is art. Let them move the statue to the commander and destroy it in one fell swoop." "How is that possible?" "You will know tomorrow morning." Renbachien waved his hand. "Sir Ren, are you really confident?" "You will know tomorrow morning." Renbachien still said the same thing. He felt that the feasibility of this plan was quite high, but whether it would work or not would depend on luck. Nothing in the world was guaranteed. No matter how thorough the plan was, there could still be all kinds of problems. A day passed, and it was late at night when the sky was at its darkest. The north gate of Liao City opened quietly. Ren Baqian and Li Qianxiu led the guards out of the city carrying the bomb and headed straight for the Great Xia barracks. Li Qianxiu was here to be Ren Baqian's bodyguard. With his strength as a protector general, even if he encountered the weakest of the top 10 experts, he would still be able to hold them off for a few moves. As for the other spirit wheel experts, he would be able to capture them whenever they came. "All right, leave it here," Ren Baqian said as he looked at the torch in the distance. This place was less than 200 meters away from the main gate of the Great Xia barracks, and they would be able to see it as soon as the sky brightened up a little. "Go back." After the guards put the bomb down, Ren Baqian and the rest went back the way they came. Nothing happened along the way. Other than the two people carrying the statue, the rest were just out for a stroll. "What next?" "Wait for the patrol team," Ren Baqian said with his night vision goggles. Not long after everyone returned to the city wall, a Great Xia patrol team arrived near the bomb. With the help of the starlight, they saw a vague figure in front of them and got a shock. They pointed their spears at the bomb and shouted, "Who's there?" Following this shout, the guards in front of the barracks also sensed something. They immediately rang the big gong at the side and woke up everyone in the barracks. "What's the matter?" a patrolling captain asked loudly. "There's a statue here." The previous patrol team finally discovered that the motionless thing was actually a statue and not a real person. It was just a false alarm. But why would such a statue be here? It couldn't possibly grow its legs and run here, right? When the lieutenant arrived and saw the statue, he first asked when it had appeared here. He also wondered what the barbarians were up to. "You have been surrounded. Surrender immediately and you will be spared. You have been surrounded. Surrender immediately." A computer-synthesized voice suddenly came from the statue, startling the captain and the surrounding guards. The captain pulled out his saber, but the statue remained motionless. It said emotionlessly, "You've been surrounded. What the hell?" The captain was aghast. This thing could actually speak? Also, who was surrounded? Were we surrounded? What a joke. "Go and patrol the surroundings and see if there's anyone else. Go and report to the commander-in-chief." The captain ordered the nearby soldiers. "What's going on? Who's talking?" At this moment, a captain who was awakened came over and asked, "Captain, there's a statue here and it can speak." When the captain came over and saw the statue, he touched it and confirmed that it was indeed made of metal. He then lifted it up with his hand and found that it was quite heavy. However, this statue could actually speak, which made him click his tongue in wonder. It was really strange. Chapter 368. "Sir Ren, what should we do next?" Li Qianxiu asked after returning to the city. "Wait, let's see the fireworks," Ren Baqian said as he opened the other box that the guard was carrying. Inside was a full set of surveillance equipment and a walkie-talkie. "Tiske, this thing is really strange. It's obviously made of iron, but it can still make sounds," informed the general. As soon as Ren Baqian turned on the surveillance device, he heard these two sentences as well as the sentence, "You have been surrounded. Surrender immediately and hand over your guns." This is? Li Qianxiu immediately thought of the radio and walkie-talkies that they used. Could there be one in the statue? More or less. Ren Baqian nodded. Even though it wasn't that far off. That way, we'll know if it's in the hands of the enemy commander. By the way, do you know who their commander is? It should be Wu Shengho. Li Qianxiu said. Very powerful? I'm not sure, but he has been fighting against the general-in-chief who supports the nation for decades, so he should have some skills. Looking at the current situation, it should be very powerful, right? Li Qianxiu smiled bitterly. If it was a one-on-one fight, he was confident that he could beat 10 of them. However, in terms of leading an army, the other party was indeed formidable. Not to mention anything else, Just the fact that the Great Xia army had lost more than half of its members and that there hadn't been any large-scale desertions up until now showed that the other party had some means to manage the army. What about his personal strength? This was what Rinpoche wanted to ask. No more than the pinnacle of the earth wheel level, Li Qianqiu replied. Even though he didn't understand the specifics, Great Xia was different from the aboriginals. Most of the aboriginal court officials were at least at the spirit wheel level, and there were many man-wheel experts in Great Xia. There were only a handful of famous spirit wheel experts. On the contrary, there were many spirit wheel experts outside of the imperial court. Great Xia placed more emphasis on the ability to handle political affairs and govern the region. As for the aboriginals, they were all the same from top to bottom. The one with the biggest fist was the boss. After hearing that the other party wasn't at the peak of the earth wheel level, Rinpoche knew what was going on. Tomorrow, you can write a petition to save your honor and send it to the Great Xia barracks. What's that? I mourn deeply for Wu Shengho. He lived a difficult life and died a wrong death. Cause of death: long hair, short knowledge. Li Qianqiu, the great general, has ordered us to check if there are any problems. If there are no problems, transport them into the camp. Rinpoche's face lit up when he heard the words from the surveillance equipment. The first step was a success. Not only are there fireworks, but there are also dishes. All that's left is your majesty and wine. Rinpoche laughed. Li Qianqiu was shocked. All that's left is your majesty and wine? You're the first person who dares to say this. Impressive. Li Qianqiu immediately moved 2 meters to avoid being splashed with blood. Given Principal Ren's weak physique, would Her Majesty beat him to death? It shouldn't be. No matter what, Rinpoche should still be alive. It would be better for him to persuade Rinpoche to at least be alive. In less than 5 minutes, a red shadow appeared on the city wall. A glass bottle smashed into Rinpoche's chest and almost knocked him off the wall. What exactly is going on? Thank you, Your Majesty. Rinpoche was grabbed by Li Qianqiu. After stabilizing himself, he held the wine bottle and laughed. It's indeed fireworks. Your Majesty, you should be able to see them in a while, Rinpoche said. That better be the case. The Empress squinted her eyes. Li Qianqiu's jaw dropped for a long time. Her Majesty actually didn't beat him up? What a great show of love. If he were to say this, Her Majesty would definitely kick him into the Great Xia barracks. Sure enough, different people had different fates. How much longer do I have to wait? The Empress started to get impatient after standing there for less than a minute. She was already gentle enough after being woken up from her sleep. Very soon. Rinpoche listened to the sound of the soldiers carrying heavy objects moving forward from the monitor. Put it here. The voice from the walkie-talkie made Rinpoche's eyes light up. He opened the bottle and asked the Empress, Your Majesty, do you want to drink? It can keep you warm. Seeing that the Empress was ignoring him, he took a sip. The ergoto went down his throat like a knife. Ha! Rinpoche spat out the smell of alcohol. Sir Li, do you want to drink? As soon as Rinpoche finished speaking, his hand was empty. The wine bottle was in Li Qianqiu's hand. He gulped it down and exclaimed, Good wine! What a strong wine! After this war, I will give you 10 bottles. Rinpoche said generously. Thank you in advance. Li Qianqiu laughed heartily. This wine was good stuff. Is this the thing that keeps making sounds? A vigorous voice came from the walkie-talkie. General, this is it. Rinpoche laughed heartily. His plan had finally succeeded. Have you been surrounded? Are they talking about themselves? Are they sparing us? They are just a group of dying people. Let's attack tomorrow and destroy Liao City in one fell swoop. Let's see what they have to say then. However, it's rare that this thing can actually talk. General is right. Now that there are 30,000 more soldiers cutting down trees to make ladders, there won't be a shortage of ladders anymore. This time, we will definitely be able to destroy Liao City in one fell swoop. I can be proud when I think of Qi Zixiao fleeing in panic. That's true. From the sound of it, there were quite a lot of people. The more they discussed, the happier Rinpoche was. That general from before and this marquis are definitely the targets. As for the other small fries, we can earn as much as we can. This statue looks familiar. Is this the seventh prince? I saw him once before he went to Dayo a year ago, and he does look similar. Why did they make a statue of the seventh prince? I heard that the seventh prince looks very similar to that poison warrior. Could this be that poison warrior? Sending his own statue here. Could it be that it's poisonous? It's not poisonous. I have just checked it. Then, what's the meaning of this statue? That poison warrior must have a reason for doing this. Wu Xingho's voice was heard again. Rinpoche hummed a tune, took out another walkie-talkie from the box, pressed a button, and sang intoxicatedly, "Because I happen to meet you. Leaving footprints is beautiful. The wind blows the flowers and tears fall like rain, because I don't want to be separated." When Rinpoche's voice was transmitted through the loudspeaker, everyone in the great Xia tent was shocked. After hearing the lyrics clearly, everyone turned pale and looked at Wu Xingho in shock. Happen to meet you? Leaving footprints is beautiful? The wind blows the flowers and tears fall like rain? Because I don't want to be separated? What the hell was this? It was terrifying to think about it. Everyone was shocked, but many of them felt that this strange voice was very pleasant to hear. This made everyone even more shocked. Who's trying to be mysterious? Wu Xingho shouted with an ashen face. Because I happen to meet you. Leaving a 10-year promise. If we meet again, I think I will remember you. As Rinpoche sang affectionately, he held a button, unlocked the safety, and pressed it with his thumb. A huge explosion immediately occurred in the Great Xia camp. It was bigger than all the previous explosions. Huge flames shot up into the sky, and the shock wave swept out in all directions like a storm. After that, everyone on the city wall heard a loud boom. Even the city wall was shaking. Even many people in the city were awakened by the vibration from the explosion in the distance. Rinpoche put down the walkie-talkie and said to the guard beside him, "Write it down. Great Xia's Wu Xingho. Cause of death. Too much curiosity, too little knowledge, and ignorance limited his imagination." Rinpoche took the wine bottle from Licencio, took a sip, turned to the Empress and asked, "Your Majesty, do you like the fireworks?" "Can he survive?" the Empress asked. From the sound, it should be within 10 meters. "He definitely won't survive," Rinpoche said with certainty. The Empress nodded. She then thought for a while and said, "The song just now is not bad. Sing it for me 100 times. Chapter 369. The Empress was distracted. Rinpoche gave himself a thumbs up. Licencio looked at the huge explosion in the distance and suddenly thought of something. He dove into the darkness in a flash, stirred up all the blood in his body, and shouted, "Assemble at the north gate." After he finished shouting, he used his hand to press down on the tent protruding from his waist and abdomen before strolling out as if nothing had happened. Rinpoche suddenly remembered that the most important thing hadn't been done yet. He asked the guards to move his mortars and artillery shells over. This time, he had to finish this battle in one fell swoop. Although Licencio was a spirit wheel expert, he rarely fought with others because the martial arts he practiced had a huge flaw. When he exerted force, his entire body would be congested with blood. As a result, Licencio had a nickname in private, which was Immortal Spear. Although his weapon of choice was a double-sided giant axe, his nickname was Immortal Spear. From this, one could see his style. Among the 5 protectorates, he was definitely outstanding. In less than 5 minutes, all the winged cavalry warriors arrived at the north gate. The previous explosion had already awakened them, and they thought that something had happened. All of them carried their weapons and went straight to the north gate upon hearing the shouts. Licencio got someone to open the gate and said in a deep voice, "Great Xia's commander, Wu Xingho, is dead, and the barracks are in chaos. Charge! Charge! We will not return without victory," the Empress said faintly as she looked at the chaotic Great Xia barracks in the distance. 1,100 winged cavalry warriors rushed madly toward the Great Xia barracks. After another 5 minutes, the other 3,000 soldiers from the Protectorate of the Center arrived. Li Qianqiu jumped down from the city wall, landed in front of everyone and said, "Great Xia's commander, Wu Shengho, is dead and the winged cavalry has set off. All generals will lead the barracks to attack the main barracks first, then turn around and defeat the reinforcements from the left and right barracks." Although they had been in a daze for some time, the other 2 barracks of Great Xia were even slower to react. Those soldiers hadn't even reached the man-will level, so it would take longer for them to reinforce the northern barracks. The time difference was enough for the 3,000 soldiers to attack first before turning back to face the attack. At this time, the sky wasn't bright yet, and Great Xia didn't have time to prepare and couldn't get into formation in a short period of time. If both sides met, the powerful strength of the aboriginals could be fully unleashed. Moreover, with the emergency reinforcements and the dark sky, more than half of the enemy's archers had been crippled. Under such circumstances, it wasn't difficult for 3,000 soldiers to defeat 20,000 to 30,000 Great Xia soldiers. The generals in the army replied and led the 3,000 soldiers out of the city. "Sir, what are we going to do?" A few burly ancient race men wearing leather armor asked. These people were the leaders of the newly established militia in Liao City. The strongest among them had already attained the earth will level. "Get ready to snatch the food." Ren Baqian was the first to speak. Currently, there weren't many rations left in the city, and a batch of Great Xia's rations had just arrived. In a while after they defeated the Great Xia army, they could snatch the rations back. As for defending the city, there was no need. There were a total of 40,000 soldiers in the east and west barracks of Great Xia's army. Their main task was to reinforce the north barracks, and it would already be considered pretty good if they could leave 5,000 soldiers to defend their barracks. They simply wouldn't have the energy to attack the city. Even if they didn't care about the survival of the north barracks and directly attacked the city, the aboriginal commoners in the city would be enough to take a bite out of them. When the main army returned, they would be like turtles in a jar. "Yes, sir." The leaders of the militia immediately responded. "Let's go out of the city too." Ren Baqian called out to the guards beside him. Everyone rode on the fork-horned cows and headed out of the city. As soon as they left the city, a few people were sent out with night vision devices and walkie-talkies to check the location of the reinforcements from the other 2 barracks. On the other hand, Ren Baqian found a place to set up the mortars. In the distance, the sounds of fighting could already be heard from the Great Xia barracks. Originally, that explosion had already wiped out all the generals in the north barracks, leaving only a few captains. Colonels, on the other hand, were usually battalion-level commanding officers, commanding 800 to 1,200 people. Regardless of whether it was in terms of strength or prestige, the captains in the barracks weren't able to calm the chaos in the barracks in a short period of time. Needless to say, they were already out of their wits. Then 1,100 earth-wheel-level winged cavalry warriors rushed in and killed anyone they saw. The outcome of an ordinary person facing an earth-wheel expert was imaginable. Even after defending the city for such a long time, the winged cavalry didn't suffer many casualties. From this, the disparity in strength could be seen. If there was someone who could command the army, they might be able to cause some trouble. However, at this moment, the higher-ups had already been wiped out. Coupled with the sudden attack of the winged cavalry, the barracks were filled with wails and howls. At this moment, another 3,000 Aboriginal soldiers rushed in, and the Great Xia barracks became even more chaotic. "Sir, the Great Xia soldiers from the East Barracks have already left the barracks. The vanguard consists of 1,000 cavalrymen, but I can't tell how many there are at the back. However, more than half of the barracks are empty." A moment after the East Barracks set off, the Great Xia soldiers from the West Barracks also set off. However, the commander of the West Barracks was even more decisive. He didn't leave a single person behind, and the entire army rushed straight to the North Barracks to provide support. "Prepare to meet the enemy," Li Qianqiu ordered through the walkie-talkie. After rushing into the barracks for a round of killing, The 3,000 Aboriginal soldiers immediately returned to the empty space to assemble and began to advance in the direction of the East Barracks. Countless torches were shining in that direction. However, just as they left the barracks, they encountered 1,000 cavalrymen rushing over at high speed. Countless soldiers wielding long swords intersected with the cavalrymen at high speed, causing the cavalrymen to fall off their horses and be trampled into mud by the horses behind them. However, these cavalrymen more or less delayed some time. When the Great Xia soldiers at the back discovered that they had encountered the enemy, a portion of them had already formed a battle formation. The soldiers that arrived one after another added to the thickness of the battle formation. The Aboriginal soldiers looked at the countless human figures illuminated by the torches in front of them and roared as they pounced over. However, the cannonballs were even faster than them. 6 cannonballs landed directly in the battle formation, immediately causing people and horses to be thrown off their feet. The battle formation was also shaken. The Aboriginal soldiers took advantage of this opportunity to pounce in and set off a reign of terror. There wasn't any suspense in the battle between 3,000 Aboriginal soldiers and 10,000 Great Xia elites. After 30 minutes, the Great Xia soldiers began to crumble. Stop chasing and kill. The rear army will become the front army and head northwest. Li Qianqiu conveyed the order. Very soon, long whistles were heard on the battlefield. The soldiers who were chasing and killing the enemy gathered together and headed northwest at high speed. The front army was under the greatest pressure during the attack. As such, when they faced another enemy army, the front and rear armies were swapped. Otherwise, even if they were man-wheel experts, it would be difficult for them to immediately carry out another round of attacks after being the tip of a sword to break the enemy's formation. This time, the opponent was 20,000 Great Xia soldiers from the West Barracks. After both sides met, Rinpoche fired another round of cannonballs. This time, he fired 10 rounds and disrupted the enemy's battle formation. However, the Great Xia soldiers from the West Barracks were split into 2. One of them was entangled with the Aboriginal soldiers, or rather, they were slaughtered. The other group sped up and headed toward the North Barracks in an attempt to be the first to enter the barracks. Foolish method, Li Qianqiu commented. They have no other choice. Rinpoche sat on the ground. The result of a clash between 20,000 Great Xia soldiers and 3,000 Aboriginal soldiers in the dark was obvious. The North Barracks still had 70,000 soldiers and 30,000 laborers. If they could gather some of the remaining soldiers, they could still fight. If they didn't rescue the North Barracks, Dayo could directly flatten this army of 20,000 soldiers. Therefore, after finding out that something had happened to the North Barracks, they immediately sent all of their troops to rescue them. After discovering that they were intercepted, they abandoned a portion of their troops. Even though they knew that these Aboriginal soldiers would soon catch up, they still had to give it a try. This was because there was no better way to deal with the current situation. Should we get rid of the generals of these 2 barracks first? It's easy to get 1,000 soldiers, but it's hard to find a good general. With so many generals dying in succession, Great Xia won't be able to reorganize the defeated army in a short period of time. If the 2 generals of the East and West Barracks run away, it's very likely that a large number of soldiers can be gathered in a short period of time, Rinpoche asked. I'll make a trip. Li Qianqiu touched his chin. He didn't even bring his weapon as he disappeared into the darkness. Not long after Li Qianqiu left, a winged cavalry warrior in front sent back a message through a walkie-talkie that they had encountered an obstruction. The other party was a god-level expert. Although he was injured, more than 30 winged cavalry warriors had died at his hands. The other party might be the legendary Lu Pinghai. When Rinpoche heard this news, the Empress naturally heard it as well. Her whole body erupted with a soaring killing intent. She first returned to the city commander's residence in a flash. When she came out again, she was already holding a longbow and a quiver of bone arrows. She transformed into a red shadow and appeared in the empty space between Liao City and the North Barracks. In a flash, she appeared dozens of meters in the air with a bow in one hand and an arrow in the other. Lu Qi, I was worried that I couldn't find you. Today, I'll send you to heaven. Chapter 370. Lu Pinghai had just arrived at the barracks with the army in the afternoon. He wanted to make a move at the crucial moment, but he didn't expect the barracks to be destroyed on the first night. This made him feel rather unlucky. He came out of his tent and looked at the chaotic barracks. He was still pondering whether he should head out of Tiesua Pass or return to Great Xia. He preferred the latter option, but he didn't fulfill his promise to the Emperor of Great Xia and felt a little embarrassed. Although the keepsake used by the other party was a joke when he was young, he didn't expect that someone would know its use and find him after so many years. However, since the keepsake was in the other party's hands, he would help him do 3 things if the other party could afford it. At the thought of this, Lu Pinghai reminisced about the past. Old people were always like this. At that time, he had just entered the martial arts world. He stayed in a very strange inn and was hired to help people kill. He remembered that the first person who hired him paid a basket of eggs and a pair of shoes. At that time, he didn't even have shoes. His attacks were fast and ruthless enough, so it didn't take long for him to earn the nickname of Quick Sword. Later, he left the inn because of a sentence from a very good-looking man. After so many years, he had forgotten the man's appearance. He only remembered his eyes, which were as clear as a child's. And that man's name Yichio. Later, he made a name for himself and met that man again. He gave him a puppet that he carved. It was that man. He said that as long as the other party could afford it, he would help him do 3 things. Unfortunately, that man didn't look for him. Then he heard that he was dead. He avenged him, but only lost a finger. From then on, he could no longer use a sword, and Quick Sword Lu Chi disappeared. Instead, he was replaced by Lu Chi with 9 fingers. Later, no one called him 9 Fingers or Lu Chi anymore. Everyone only knew him as the 8th most powerful expert in the world, Lu Pinghai. Just as he was reminiscing about the journey to the west, the surrounding Great Xia soldiers all ran away and were replaced by a group of tall and burly winged cavalry warriors. Their arms were big enough to run a horse and their fists were big enough to stand on. Then there was no then. Lu Pinghai discovered the Empress when she appeared in the sky. If he couldn't discover her at such a close distance, then he would be one of the top 10 experts in the world. He merely glanced at the Empress in the air before using his sleeves to form a long rod and striking the chests of the 2 winged cavalry warriors. The 2 winged cavalry warriors immediately flew backward and spat out blood. A moment ago, this pair of sleeves had transformed into a saber, a spear, a sword, and a staff. His divine weapon was precisely this pair of sleeves, and it was known as the 1,000 silk sleeves. It could change into tens of thousands of different forms, and it could be used as he wished. After sending the 2 winged cavalry warriors flying, Lu Pinghai flew backward. Lu Chi, I was worried that I couldn't find you. Today, I shall send you to heaven. The Empress knocked an arrow and shot. As soon as he left, a hole of unknown depth appeared on the ground. Only then did the surrounding people feel the wind brought by the bone arrows blowing on their faces, and a series of explosion-like sounds. The arrow was faster than sound. Chi. Lu Pinghai only managed to utter a single word before his silhouette flickered. Several bone arrows left a row of holes in the ground behind him. Z. Lu Pinghai squeezed out a word from between his teeth before continuing to flee. Several more holes appeared on the ground behind him. Shao. Lu Pinghai dragged his voice as he fled. The quiver in the Empress's hands was half empty. Her speed was almost the same as Rinpochien's machine gun. Crazy woman. Before Lu Pinghai could finish his sentence, he was showered with arrows. He cursed in his heart and broke into a run. The Empress landed on the ground first. When a few winged cavalry warriors saw her, they immediately cupped their hands and greeted, "Your Majesty." Following which, the Empress disappeared like the wind, along with the quiver of 5 or 6 winged cavalry warriors. Lu Pinghai stayed close to the ground, and his speed was so fast that the surrounding people couldn't see him clearly. On the other hand, every time the Empress leaped into the air and shot half of the quiver, she would jump up again after landing. She was like a goshawk hunting for a wild rabbit, and her eyes were glued to Lu Pinghai's back. The sound of arrows exploding in the air traveled from the center of the barracks to the north. After the Empress shot the arrows, she hung the bow on her back. Her whole body began to turn red, and streaks of purple tattoo-like lines appeared on her face. Her speed immediately increased by several notches. Qi Xiao. Hongwu isn't dead yet. How much hatred do you have? Lu Pinghai felt that something was amiss. He turned around and saw the lines on the Empress's face from afar. She was chasing after him at a speed that was 30% faster than his. Although he didn't know the specific martial arts of Qi Xiao, he had heard of this situation. This was clearly a secret technique used by aboriginals to burn their blood essence when they were fighting for their lives. That day Hongwu used this technique. If he didn't drag it out until Hongwu was exhausted, he was afraid that his injuries would have been more serious than Hongwu's. Qi Xiao burned her blood essence the moment she saw him. How much hatred did she have? Furthermore, this kind of secret technique was also divided into different grades. The higher the grade, the longer the duration, and the lesser the repercussions. He didn't think that the Empress's martial arts would be inferior to Hongwu's, so his heart suddenly trembled. The Empress's face was ice cold. Without saying a word, she stomped hard on the ground. A rock the size of a fork-horned cow was first covered with cracks, and then with a loud bang, it shattered into pieces. If I say I'm going to kill you, then I'm definitely going to kill you. The two of them chased and fled, getting further and further away from Liao City. The distance between the Empress and Lu Pinghai was less than 20 meters. Lu Pinghai had no choice but to turn around and exchange a punch with the Empress. After that, he flew backward and borrowed the force of the collision to increase the distance between them. However, every collision made him feel as if he was swung by a giant hammer. Now, he knew why Hua Sanlu died in the hands of Qi Xiao. Not only was she extremely strong, but she was also extremely fast. It was extremely difficult to escape. Now, it depended on how long Qi Xiao's secret technique could last. Previously, Hongwu lasted for an hour. He didn't know how long Qi Xiao could last. If Qi Xiao didn't know when to stop, when the time came, Rinpochian would capture her and send her to the Emperor of Great Xia. After another 2 hours, Lu Pinghai had already vomited 3 mouthfuls of blood. However, Qi Xiao still didn't have the slightest intention of giving up the chase. At this time, the sky had already started to brighten. In front of the two of them was a continuous stretch of barracks. If one were to look from the sky, they would be able to see that this huge barracks surrounded a city. In 2 hours, the two of them ran from Liao City to Tiesua Pass. Looking at the barracks in the distance, Lu Pinghai's mind was racing. If they saw his situation, he would really lose face. However, with Qi Xiao's current situation, he didn't know how long she could continue the chase, but he was almost at his limit. Running from Liao City to Tiesua Pass in 2 hours. It was a full 400 kilometers. At this time, the speed of the two of them was less than 30% of their initial speed. However, under such circumstances, they still ran more than 400 kilometers in 2 hours. Furthermore, they had to cross over mountains and ridges. Even a spirit wheel expert couldn't afford such exhaustion. Qi Xiao is here. Help her quickly. Lu Pinghai seized the opportunity to shout. However, this breath of air caused him to slow down. He turned around and used his sleeves to block 6 consecutive punches from the Empress. While vomiting blood in the air, he fell toward the barracks in front of him. Lu Pinghai's shout alarmed countless people in the Great Xia barracks. Immediately, there was a commotion, and dozens of figures immediately jumped out of the barracks. It's Lu Pinghai and Qi Xiao. The people who jumped out of the barracks exclaimed upon seeing the two of them. She's exhausted from running from Liao City to here in 2 hours. Quickly attack, Lu Pinghai shouted while vomiting blood. He felt extremely bitter. This Qi Xiao was actually so powerful. As soon as he said this, those figures immediately became restless. Furthermore, 2 more figures landed outside the barracks. When the others saw them, they felt confident. Although they weren't the top 10 experts, they were still spirit wheel experts. Normally, they wouldn't be able to defeat Qi Xiao. However, after running from Liao City to here in 2 hours, Qi Xiao was probably at the end of her rope. Attack! Someone shouted, and dozens of figures rushed toward the two of them. The Empress didn't care and stared at Lu Pinghai. The purple veins on her face became denser and darker. Drops of blood seeped out from the surface of her skin. When Lu Pinghai saw her like this, he really wanted to curse in his heart. Was there a need to be so desperate? What kind of hatred and resentment did she have? Wasn't it enough to chase him for 2 hours? Now that she was at the end of her rope, she even burned her blood essence? At this point, the Empress didn't care about anyone else. After catching up with Lu Pinghai, she sent him flying with a series of punches. Then, she leaped into the air and stepped on Lu Pinghai's body as he flew backward. With a loud bang, she landed in the Great Xia barracks. Lu Pinghai smashed a hole in the ground. Blood spurted out from his mouth and nose, but he was still able to turn over and jump out. Then he broke into a run. He could tell that Qi Zixiao wasn't just risking her life. She was simply exchanging her life. The Empress caught up with Lu Pinghai again, grabbed his shoulders with both hands, and kept rushing forward. Tents, fences, turrets, and everything else were like paper. Under the impact of the Empress's charge, they were all smashed into pieces. Lu Pinghai was vomiting blood while making intimate contact with all kinds of things. Looking from the sky, the Empress looked like a yellow dragon behind her. The Empress and Lu Pinghai were the heads of the dragon. Beside the yellow dragon, there were dozens of people chasing after it. 2 of the spirit will experts used weapons. One of them used a sword while the other raised his hand. A 1-meter-long wooden pillar appeared in the air and crashed into the Empress's back. The Empress didn't seem to care at all. After being hit 3 times in a row, her speed increased with each hit. However, on the 3rd hit she also vomited blood. At this point in time, the Empress looked extremely horrifying. Her exposed skin was almost covered with purple veins. Tiny beads of blood seeped out of her skin and dyed her white inner clothes red. However, she held onto Lu Pinghai tightly and didn't let him move an inch. She carried him as she charged forward, creating a straight line in the Great Xia barracks. Human bodies, fences, city gates, houses, and courtyard walls. Just like a bulldozer, everything in front of her was destroyed. Just like that, she crashed into Tiesua Pass. Hong Wu felt that the aura outside was somewhat familiar. Just as he came out of the residence, he saw a red figure carrying a person as it charged in front of him. The figure knocked him to the ground, passed through the residence, and headed from the south to the north gate. Hong Wu was almost scared to death. He hurriedly chased after the Empress and shouted, "Your Majesty, Your Majesty!" However, the Empress couldn't hear him at this point. Her eyes had turned completely black, and not a trace of light could be seen. Chapter 371. As soon as the Empress woke up, she felt a sharp pain in her body. Every cell in her body was groaning in intense pain. If it were someone else, they would have screamed. The Empress opened her eyes to look at the ceiling, then turned her head and saw Hong Wu guarding by the bed. "Your Majesty!" Hong Wu didn't know what to say when he saw that the Empress had woken up. He never imagined that the Empress would chase Lu Qi all the way from Liao City to here, risking serious injuries, and push him all the way from the Great Xia barracks to the city. If he hadn't stopped her, she would have pushed him all the way to Great Xia. "Is Lu Qi dead?" the Empress asked directly. Her tone was cold, and no one could tell that she was in pain. However, how could Hong Wu, who had just exploded not long ago, not know? "Although he's not dead, he's going to die soon. I've detained him," Hong Wu replied. "Kill him." The Empress decided the fate of Lu Qi, Lu Pinghai. No matter how strong he was, she wouldn't treat him with respect and make him her subordinate. Since she wanted to kill him, she had to kill him. "Your Majesty, it's too dangerous," Hong Wu said in a deep voice. "Your Majesty is the ruler of a nation. How can you do such a thing? If anything happens to you, not to mention one Lu Qi, even 10 Lu Qis won't be able to stop you. What will happen to Dayo then? What will happen to the millions of people?" "I won't die," the Empress said faintly. She was still conscious when she was in the Great Xia barracks, but at that time, she was really exhausted. She burned her blood essence and rushed to the city gate. She only lost consciousness when she crashed into the city gate. Otherwise, how could she be so accurate? Even so, why do you have to do this? With your status, how can you take such a risk? Hongwu's face was filled with grief. He had watched the Empress grow up and was closer to her than his own. How could he remain indifferent when she was in such a state? Lu Qi is too dangerous, the Empress said faintly. Unless he and Hongwu were in the same place, Lu Qi would be in great danger no matter which troop he was in. Although she didn't know how Great Xia managed to make Lu Qi work for them, she couldn't leave such an expert in the hands of Great Xia. The Aboriginals didn't have many soldiers to begin with, and their biggest reliance was their powerful individual strength. They were most afraid of encountering a super expert like Lu Qi. It would be fine if the other party was an ordinary spirit will expert. However, no one would be able to stop a super expert like Lu Qi unless he encountered her or Hongwu. Previously, he tried to assassinate Hongwu, and this time he appeared in the Great Xia army. This already explained some things. It was too dangerous to have a super expert like him in the Great Xia army. Since he had met him, he must not let him live. Not to mention, there were other grudges between them, so it was even more impossible to keep him alive. However, there was no need to talk about this. Your Majesty, are you trying to avenge me? If that's the case, I really deserve to die for putting your Majesty in such danger. Hongwu's sudden tone of flattery made the Empress's head throb. You're thinking too much. If you keep talking, I'll kill you. The Empress said coldly. If it wasn't for the fact that her entire body was in pain and she couldn't move freely, she would have kicked this old man out. No matter what, your Majesty must not do this again. Hongwu sighed. I won't die, the Empress replied faintly. I want to see Lu Qi's head. That will make me feel better. Hongwu was touched when he left the door. His eyes were filled with tears. Your Majesty, are you trying to avenge me? Are you really trying to avenge me? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Your Majesty is willing to take such a risk for me. My painstaking efforts over the years aren't in vain. The little girl from back then is already so powerful. At the thought of this, another person popped up in Hongwu's mind. It's a pity that that bastard is going to benefit from it. At this moment, Hongwu hated Rinpochen to the core, even though he was indeed quite useful. For example, a radio station, a drone, a walkie-talkie, a telescope, and he even heard that salt was produced recently. However, being useful and hating were two different things. He definitely wouldn't let that fellow off. After a while, Hongwu came back with a human head with a bloody nose and a swollen face. The head was full of meat lumps. Is this Lu Qi? The Empress asked suspiciously as she lay on the bed. He didn't look like Lu Qi. Your Majesty, it's indeed Lu Qi. Hongwu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lu Qi was really unlucky to have been used as a shield by Her Majesty. He even smashed through the city gate, which was 1.5 feet thick, and even created holes in the stone walls and houses of his residence. He was already very lucky to be alive. Of course, this was also because Lu Qi was seriously injured at that time and was on the verge of death. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been in such a miserable state. A spirit will expert, especially one at Lu Qi's level, had physical strength that ordinary practitioners couldn't measure. However, even though he didn't die at that time, he couldn't be any more dead now. It was a pity that such an expert actually died in such a manner. Oh! The Empress nodded. Since Hongwu said it was Lu Qi, then it was Lu Qi. The Empress then thought of something else and asked, Is there anything else on him? He has this. Hongwu took out a wooden box. What is it? The Empress asked. A spirit yuan pill and his martial arts, as well as the method to condense his 1,000-thread sleeves. Hongwu opened the box and revealed a thin book. Underneath it was a jade box that contained a red elixir. There were circles of veined patterns on the elixir, but it didn't emit any fragrance. It was as if it had been completely absorbed into the elixir. Hongwu showed the spirit yuan pill to the Empress, closed the box, and placed it next to the Empress. Then, Hongwu suddenly thought of something and asked, Your Majesty, don't tell me that you are going to snatch the spirit yuan pill for that fellow? If that's the case, I will kill him with one slap. You are thinking too much, the Empress said faintly. Your Majesty, you have only known that fellow for less than a year. Hong Wu's face was full of grief. A grown girl really couldn't be kept at home. I will beat you to death if you speak again. The Empress gritted her teeth in hatred. Why didn't she realize that this old man was so annoying in the past? At the same time, she secretly swore that when she could move again, she would definitely kick this old man out. After sighing for a long time, Hong Wu suppressed the thought that a grown girl couldn't be kept at home and asked about the situation in Liao City. Previously, when the Empress chased Ren Baqin here, he asked about the situation in Liao City. However, it was said that the army had killed their way out, and the people left in the city commander's residence didn't know much. Now that the Empress had woken up, it was the right time to ask her. Wu Shengho is dead, the Empress said faintly. Then, she roughly explained what happened that night. There were many things that she didn't understand, so she didn't say anything. Hong Wu only knew that Ren Baqin made something that was carried back to the barracks by the Great Xia army. Subsequently, Wu Shengho and most of the high-ranking generals died. The winged cavalry and Li Qianqiu's troops defeated the Great Xia army and killed their way through. Upon hearing this, Hong Wu was overjoyed. The entire plan for Great Xia's southern invasion was made by Wu Shengho. Now that he was dead, it wouldn't be easy for Great Xia to find someone to replace him. As long as the Great Xia army in Tiesua Pass and Shun City was restrained, the winged cavalry and Li Qianqiu's troops, as well as the 3,500 garrison soldiers and reinforcements from the Protectorate of the South, which consisted of 11,000 soldiers and more than 1,000 winged cavalry warriors, were sufficient to wipe out the Great Xia army in the north of Deyo. At that time, the siege of Tiesua Pass and Shun City would naturally be lifted. This time, Great Xia could be said to have suffered heavy casualties and gained nothing. One had to know that Great Xia had already invested 700,000 soldiers, and there were 180,000 soldiers outside Tiesua Pass and Shun City. Originally, Wu Shengho had 110,000 soldiers, and Deyo had 140,000 soldiers, a total of 430,000 soldiers. Now that Wu Shengho was dead, the Great Xia army was being massacred along the way, and only half of them could escape. If the two armies in Deyo were to be annihilated, the Great Xia army in the south would only be left with about 200,000 soldiers, and they might not be able to cope with the Aboriginals' attack in the future. After the two sides talked, Hong Wu left in joy with the head. A moment later, the radio was sent to the room at the Empress's request. At this moment, Ren Baqin was sitting on top of the city wall. The winged cavalry had already killed their way out. After defeating the two reinforcements, the 3,000 soldiers also chased after them to the north. At this moment, the thousands of guards in the East Barracks simply ignored them. They were afraid that they would sneak away quietly. The city sent some militia to the North Barracks to collect rations and fodder. Meanwhile, he was waiting here for the Empress to return. It has already been 8 hours, right? Ren Baqin calculated the time. He didn't know where Her Majesty had chased Lu Qi to, and she actually hadn't returned after so long. The distance was too far, and the walkie-talkie couldn't be contacted. However, with the Empress's strength, as long as she didn't barge into the Great Xia army alone, she would be able to return safely no matter where she went. Suddenly, someone hurriedly ran to the city wall and reported, "Sir Ren, Her Majesty is at Tiesua Pass." Why did Her Majesty go there? Ren Baqin was flabbergasted. "Her Majesty is using the radio to contact you and is waiting for you," that soldier replied. Ren Baqin hurriedly rushed back to the city commander's residence. "Your Majesty? Why did you go to Tiesua Pass? Why do you care why I'm here?" The Empress rarely lost her temper. Her body was already hurting, yet you still asked such nonsense. "Your Majesty, you are the boss, and you have the final say." Ren Baqin immediately admitted his mistake. "I will guard this place for a few days. Come and pick me up after you have eliminated the enemy troops," the Empress said in a cold tone. "Yes. At that time, I will ride on a rainbow cloud to pick you up." Chapter 372. Rinpoche sat at the top of the city wall and watched the militia excitedly pushing carts of rations back. There was also a large herd of cows and sheep. Even though the ordinary soldiers of Great Xia ate rations, some practitioners still ate meat. Even though their appetites weren't as big as the Aboriginals, they still ate quite a lot. What are the arrangements? Rinpoche tilted his head and asked. Distribute the rations to the commoners and bring the livestock with you, Li Qianxiu said. The commoners could still eat the rations, but if the soldiers ate them, they wouldn't have to do anything else and would have to eat from morning to night. At noon, the soldiers of the Protectorate of the Center returned. All of them were so hungry that their faces were twitching. The winged cavalry only returned in the afternoon. Dozens of kilometers to the north of the North Barracks were covered with the corpses of Great Xia soldiers. If they weren't so hungry, they would have chased them for another day. It had been a month. They had been besieged for a month, and they could finally vent their anger. Just as Rinpoche had expected, the guards in the East Barracks had slipped away in the morning. The soldiers in the city didn't go after them, so they took advantage of the situation. Get someone to bury them. Otherwise, it will be troublesome if a plague breaks out, Rinpoche said. Li Qianxiu nodded. They understood this principle. Along the way down from the city wall, Rinpoche heard people asking, did they win? The Great Xia army has escaped. When are we going to attack them? Similar remarks were made. The Aboriginal commoners were far more concerned about being besieged by Great Xia than about being defeated. To these Burish people, being besieged by Great Xia for a month was a huge disgrace. As for the casualties, the Aboriginals didn't care much about it. Or rather, everyone believed in the existence of the spirits of their ancestors and weren't that afraid of death. Just like the believers of some religions on Earth, they weren't afraid of death. Instead, they believed that they would welcome a better home after death. All of these showed that the Aboriginals were extraordinarily ambitious. The faces of the commoners in the city were filled with joy and hearty laughter. Their voices were much louder, especially when carts of grain were being transported into the city. The commoners, who were running out of grain, were very excited. Many people stuck their heads out of their homes to look. As for other things, such as young girls throwing themselves at him to express their excitement when they saw him in his official robes, or celebrating joyfully, there were none. Everyone did what they were supposed to do. When the soldiers returned to the barracks, they began to eat and then lay down to sleep. Some of the commoners helped to deal with the rations, while the rest of them hung their clothes and beat their children. In the hearts of the commoners, it was just defeating an enemy. If you yell, it will be a joke. The children of the Aboriginals are really tough. Rinpoche saw a woman carrying a 7- or 8-year-old child by the neck and throwing him out of the courtyard. Go out and have fun. Don't cause trouble here. That child rolled on the ground, patted the dust off his body, bared his shiny front teeth at Rinpoche, yelled, and ran away. Was she his real mother? Rinpoche was a little curious about what the Empress would be like when he and the Empress had a child in the future. From the Empress's character, it was very likely that the child would watch her eat snacks, eat candy, or watch her binge-watch dramas. Rinpoche rubbed his face as he imagined such a scene. It was better not to think so much. In the end, there was a celebration at night, but it was organized by Rinpoche. After all, it was his first time experiencing war. After a month of arduous defending the city, the soldiers shed their blood, and the people in the city were united. Finally, despite the huge disparity in numbers, they won with great difficulty. They had to celebrate. There was no wine in the army, but there was enough meat. After slaughtering half of the livestock that was brought over from the Great Xia barracks, the entire army finally had their fill and was in a jubilant mood. There were dozens of circles in the barracks. In each circle, there were shirtless burly men fighting without any rules. From time to time, someone would be thrown out of the crowd, causing a series of excited howls. Who's next? Rinpoche held the bottle of wine left behind by the Empress and watched the freestyle fight. After drinking a bottle of wine, he directly lay on the ground. The bustling night passed. The next day, the results of the battle were tallied. In this battle, more than half of Great Xia's casualties were lost, while the Aboriginals' losses were negligible. The biggest casualties were the dozens of winged cavalry warriors who died at the hands of Lu Pinghai. But on this day, new information came back. Sir, there's news from the Protectorate of the Northeast. The Yun nation has sent their troops and has arrived at the front lines. Renbachyan grinned after hearing this. This was great. He didn't even have to find an excuse. After fighting with Great Xia for more than a month, the Yun nation didn't make any moves. Even though Great Xia had the upper hand and Dayo was defending step by step, the Yun nation was still there studying. Now that the war was almost over, you made a move. If I don't beat you up, I would be letting down my conscience. Even courting death wouldn't be as professional as you. Sure enough, you can't even get a hot piece of sh*t. Li Qianxiu laughed when he heard this news. He had the same thoughts as Renbachyan. This was the worst time for the Yun nation to send their troops. If it was earlier, Great Xia would still have the upper hand. If it was later, they might have already received detailed information about the Great Xia army and would reconsider sending their troops. Everyone in Dayo was very interested in going to the Yun nation to plunder. However, Renbachyan knew that this wasn't just a simple plunder. After dealing with Great Xia, the next step was to conquer the Yun nation and incorporate it into Dayo's territory. The Yun nation's mines and salt fields were very important to Dayo. Li Qianxiu made some arrangements before leading the army out of the city to the south to encircle and annihilate the two Great Xia armies. Renbachyan waited for half a day and returned to Earth to replenish 100 mortar shells and 1,000 rounds of anti-aircraft machine gun bullets before chasing after the Yun nation with his guards. This time, the number of his guards had increased from 50 to 100. With 100 Earthwheel experts as his guards, as long as they didn't encounter a large group of enemy troops, they would be able to do whatever they wanted. In Great Xia, even the top aristocratic families couldn't come up with such a luxurious lineup. Renbachyan felt that if he were to bring along 100 guards, he would be able to do whatever he wanted on Earth. After chasing for 3 days, Renbachyan once again replenished 50 mortar shells and more than 2,000 rounds of anti-aircraft machine gun bullets. With guns in hand, there was no need to panic. With 170 mortar shells and 5,000 rounds of anti-aircraft machine gun bullets, no matter what kind of enemy they encountered, it would be enough. The two armies of Great Xia merged together on the day Renbachyan returned to Earth and headed north. It seemed like they knew about Wu Shengho's death and the defeat of the army outside Liao City. If they didn't retreat and continued to advance, they would reach the mouth of the Great Xia army in 2 days. If they occupied that place, it would be easy to defend and difficult to attack. However, after the defeat of the Great Xia army in Liao City, they were completely trapped there. Dayo didn't even need to attack. They would starve to death after being besieged for half a month. Therefore, even though they had swept through the northern part of Dayo and were about to occupy the most important place, they had no choice but to retreat. The moment Great Xia's army outside Liao City was defeated, it was already a failure. If there was any good news for Great Xia from this war, it would be that the Yun nation had taken over. Chapter 373. Great Xia. When Xia Bailong received the urgent report from the front line, he immediately smashed the cup in his hand. He still felt angry and overturned the table in the study room. After throwing a tantrum for a long time, he shouted, "This is infuriating." Then he felt a wave of dizziness. His vision turned black, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Upon seeing this, the eunuch who was hiding far away hurriedly called for the imperial physician. The palace was in a state of panic. Her Majesty is suffering from anxiety and anger, and her mind is temporarily blocked. I will prescribe some medicine in a while. You guys should also advise Her Majesty not to get angry and to remain calm. The imperial physician left to prescribe the medicine. Half a day had passed by the time Xia Bailong regained consciousness. "Water," Xia Bailong muttered, and the eunuch beside him hurriedly served warm water. "What time is it?" "Your Majesty, it's already 5 p.m., the eunuch replied cautiously. "Summon the 3 dukes, the general-in-chief of the army, and the minister of war." Xia Bailong was furious when he recalled the urgent report he saw previously. He felt a headache and quickly pressed his temples with his fingers. Your Majesty, the imperial physician came just now and said that Your Majesty fainted because of anxiety and anger. You need to remain calm and not get angry. Your Majesty, please take care of your body, the eunuch said cautiously. Go quickly, Xia Bailong said sternly. An hour later, a group of people gathered in this room. Take a look. Xia Bailong threw the piece of paper at the head of the bed. He couldn't help but read it again, but he felt a tightness in his chest after reading it. The imperial tutor took it and saw a few pieces of information written on the first piece of paper. The first one was that Wu Shengho and the generals were dead. Dayo took advantage of the situation to break into the barracks and suffered more than half of the casualties. The second one was that Qi Zixiao pursued Lu Pinghai to Tiesua Pass. He broke through the barracks and entered the pass. He was suspected to be seriously injured. Lu Pinghai died, and his head was hung at the top of the city wall. The third one was that Lu Pinghai died, and the practitioners in the barracks were in an uproar. Lu Pinghai's status and prestige were too high. Now that he was dead, the others couldn't sit still and had the intention to retreat. The fourth piece of news was that the two armies that had entered Dayo had already been informed. The two armies had become isolated and were about to be besieged. There were a few pieces of paper at the back that detailed these points, including what they had heard from some of the defeated soldiers. They had found a statue outside the camp that day, and after it was carried back, it exploded, turning the area within a radius of several dozen feet into a sea of fire. There were also countless hidden weapons that shot out from the sea of fire, killing Wu Shengho and many other generals, as well as the details of the Empress's pursuit of Lu Pinghai. After the Grand Preceptor finished reading, he silently passed it to the Grand Tutor beside him. The Grand Tutor then silently passed it to the Grand Protector, who then passed it to the Grand General. The Grand General immediately frowned and passed it to the Minister of War. How could this be? Finally, someone broke the silence in the room. Xia Baichong smashed the cabinet next to him with a slap. Jin Ling has harmed the country. His family should be demoted and exiled. Your Majesty, you mustn't. Great General Zhao Hongji hurriedly spoke up to stop him. If we do that, I'm afraid the frontline soldiers will be disappointed. Your Majesty, you mustn't do this. The three dukes and the Minister of War also spoke up. My army. Xia Bailong almost couldn't catch his breath. Out of the 700,000 soldiers, only 200,000 were left outside Tiesua Pass. There were still more than 100,000 soldiers within Dayo's borders, and he didn't know how many of them would return. A few days ago, he was still full of confidence as he waited for the battle report of his army flattening the north of Dayo. Today, it turned into a complete loss. How could he tolerate this? He forcibly calmed himself down. He also knew that it was impossible to deal with Wu Shengho. Instead, he asked, "What should we do next? Does anyone have any ideas?" Upon hearing this, the three dukes lowered their eyelids and lowered their heads. They had made up their minds not to speak. It was better for professionals to handle professional matters. Great General Zhao and the Minister of War had a difficult look on their faces. The two of them could even draw the map of Dayo with their eyes closed. When they saw the urgent report just now, they immediately knew that unless there was a huge unforeseen event, such as encountering an earth-shaking dragon, this battle was beyond redemption. After a long while, Great General Zhao said, "Now, the only thing we can do is to negotiate with Dayo and let the 100,000 soldiers return. Our army will then release the siege of Tiesua Pass and Shun City. After withdrawing, we can make new plans." "I'm not resigned to this," Xia Bailong hissed. "This is only a temporary plan. Looking at the time, the Yin nation should be making their move soon. It just so happens that they can distract Dayo's energy. However, in my opinion, even though the Yun nation is well equipped, their soldiers are messy and it's difficult to get orders from the top to the bottom. I'm afraid that they won't be able to hold on for too long. We should step up our efforts to contact the immigrants from the Hao nation and even send some people to help them revolt. At the same time, we can persuade the monarch of the Qin nation to send troops together with us. We might as well give them some benefits. With these few countries distracting Dayo, it will be difficult for them to recuperate. Regardless of whether it's their military strength or food supplies, they won't be able to sustain it. At that time, our army will find the right opportunity to march south and defeat the enemy in one fell swoop. After hearing this, Xia Bailong began to ponder. After a while, he raised his head and asked everyone, "What do you think of Great General Zhao's plan?" Even though I don't know much about military affairs, in my opinion, Great General Zhao's words are wise. This plan is feasible. The imperial tutor nodded his head when he saw Xia Bailong looking at him. I also think it's feasible. Seeing everyone nod their heads, Xia Bailong pondered for a moment. Even though he was still unwilling, this was the only way. Hence, he said, since this is the case, there's no time to lose. Immediately pass down the order and let General Yunhui inform Dayo about this matter. Tell them to bring back the 100,000 soldiers, withdraw the troops that are surrounding Tiesua Pass and Shun City, and call a temporary truce. After he finished speaking, he raised his head and asked, "Will Dayo release them?" Nobody could answer this question. If it was a normal person, Great Xia would most likely let them go since they proposed a truce. After all, Dayo had suffered a lot of losses. If they continued to fight, even if the two armies were eliminated, Dayo's own casualties would not be small. However, no one could guarantee what the barbarians would decide. Pass down the order first. Xia Bailong frowned and waved his hand. Send a messenger to inform Su Yi that if the Yun nation wants to withdraw their troops, find a way to stabilize them and agree to some of their conditions if necessary. In addition, do you have any good candidates for the envoy to the Qin nation? At this moment, the Yun nation's army had already assembled outside Qingtang Pass, which was far away from Dayo. The entire pass was covered with all kinds of flags. Other than the 200,000 soldiers who were stationed at Qingtang Pass, the rest of the 430,000 soldiers were from various cities in the Yun nation. Some had 20,000 soldiers, while others only had 6,000 soldiers. Behind them, there were some soldiers from cities further away who were heading in this direction. "Sir, the people from Siwei City and Qinghuan City are fighting," a young general shouted as he strode into a building in the center of Qingtang Pass. A middle-aged man in a long robe was standing there admiring a piece of calligraphy on the wall. Even though it was calligraphy, the sword aura in it was awe-inspiring. Even though this piece of calligraphy had been imprinted in his mind, he would still look at it every day in order to comprehend it. Upon hearing the young general's words, he turned his head and smiled. "Has it been settled?" "It has been settled." However, "Those fellows are too outrageous," the young general complained. "General, I'm afraid that they won't be able to help on the battlefield. Instead, they will retreat when something happens and affect our army." The middle-aged man shook his head slightly. How could he not know that such a patchwork army was unbearable? However, that bunch of people in the imperial court still wanted to retain enough military strength to suppress those warlords. They even wanted to use this opportunity to exhaust the strength of those warlords. Therefore, they simply created such a coalition army. Furthermore, in such a short period of time, before the entire army arrived, they had already sent people to urge him to attack as soon as possible. He really didn't know what else was in the minds of those people other than **T. However, these coalition armies each had their own ideas and were indeed difficult to arrange. Even if he was given more time, he wouldn't be able to integrate these coalition armies into an iron plate. Chapter 374. The next day, hundreds of thousands of Yun nation soldiers swarmed towards Sanchi City, which was dozens of miles away. Their flags covered the sky. Although there was some chaos during the march, there was no major trouble. Zi Donglai, the Protectorate of the Northeast's Protectorate General, had been waiting for a long time. When they were still 10 miles away from Sanchi City, he opened the city gate and led the army out. They collided with the Yun nation's army. After the vanguard met the enemy, they split into two groups, bypassed the Yun nation's western army in the center, and charged toward the mixed coalition army at the back. The mixed army was well equipped, and even the ordinary soldiers were wearing leather armor. However, the greatest problem was that they lacked a unified command, and all of them wanted to preserve their own strength. As a result, they had only clashed with the enemy for a few moments before they were slaughtered into chaos. The army of more than 100,000 was directly routed by the charge of the 10,000 soldiers of the Protectorate of the Northeast. If not for the Western garrison army turning around and launching a pincer attack, they would have lost more than half of their men in this battle. Zedonglai stood on a hill at the side with a pair of binoculars that were sent to him a few days ago. He sneered as he looked at the Yun Nation's army fleeing in all directions. These Yun Nation bastards actually dared to attack him. They really didn't know their place. All troops, disperse to both sides and advance 1.5 miles toward the city center. Take a break at Mount Yuguan and Mount Days and wait for orders. Keep your distance from the Western army. After that, he used his binoculars to carefully observe the Western garrison army in the distance. This army was considered the most powerful one in the Yun Nation. Their movements were orderly, and their murderous aura soared to the sky. They were indeed considered elites. However, they were only elites in the Yun Nation. Zedonglai was interested in a carriage-like thing in the Western Army's formation. On top of it was a box that was as tall and wide as a person, and there were two people standing behind the box. Zhao Yu, Zhao Yang, Zheng Qian, Chizhua lead the troops and attack. Under Zedonglai's order, 4,000 aboriginal soldiers drew their long sabers and charged toward the Western Army on the Central Plain. There was no hesitation in the 4,000 people attacking the 100,000 people. Zedonglai used the binoculars to watch the Western Army push the carriages to the front of the formation and open the wooden boards at the back, revealing dense arrows. Release! The Western garrison army gave the order, and the two people in the carriage immediately pulled the lever next to the box. Countless crossbow bolts shot out from the box, forming a black arrow rain. Kill! The Aboriginal warriors at the very front brandished their long swords and chopped down the arrows that were shot at them. However, there were still some arrows that slipped through and pierced through their bodies. Many soldiers who were hit in vital spots immediately fell to the ground. Even more soldiers who were pierced by arrows only paused for a moment before roaring and charging forward with bloodshot eyes. After a round of shooting, the soldiers with shields and spears immediately passed through the gaps between the carriages, firmly surrounding the carriages. Someone immediately brought a few boxes to the carriage. The boxes were filled with exposed arrow shafts. Someone aimed the arrow shaft at the back of the box and pressed it into the hole left by the crossbow bolt. In just a moment, a quarter of the box was filled. 4 boxes with arrow shafts were pressed on. The box on the carriage was already filled with crossbow bolts. Retreat! Zedonglai ordered. The scene he had just seen had given him an understanding of the use of the carriages in the Yun Nation. At least 100 crossbow bolts were shot out in a fan shape, covering a large area. Moreover, their penetrative power was quite high, and their range far exceeded that of a normal crossbow bolt's 100 steps. Even at a distance of 200 steps, they were still quite powerful. But in this round, at least 200 soldiers had died. The other party only used 6 such carriages in each direction. From what he could see, the Yun Nation had at least 60 such carriages. Another point was that this new weapon from the Yun Nation could reload the crossbow bolts very quickly. From what he could see, the crossbow bolts could be reloaded after a count of 30. It was indeed a little troublesome to encounter such a weapon in the wilderness. He immediately ordered everyone to bypass the Western City Army and return to the city. He dared to divide his troops into 2 groups to bypass the Western City Army and directly attack the coalition army. He also dared to let them return under the nose of the Western City Army. If the Western City Army dared to chase after them, it would be exactly what he wanted. The crossbow boxes on the carriages could only be used for confrontation between 2 armies and couldn't be used for pursuit. Zedonglai gently tossed the walkie-talkie with one hand and caught it. This thing was indeed a good thing. With this thing, it was very convenient to convey orders on the battlefield. It could be directly transmitted to the battalions, and the 10,000 soldiers could be divided into 10 battalions. Rinpoche found out about this battle that night. Under the nose of the Western City Army, Zedong divided his troops into two groups to bypass the Western City Army and attack the coalition army at the back. Rinpoche didn't know much about Zedong, the Protector General of the Northeast, but those who could reach this position weren't easy to deal with. According to the guard beside him, among the 5 protectors, Hongwu, the Protector General of the North, was the most skilled. Li Qianqiu, the Protector General of the Central, Shi Wanya, the Protector General of the South, and Zhui Yu, the Protector General of the Southeast, had never made any mistakes. Many people felt that he didn't look like an aboriginal. Zedong, the Protector General of the Northeast, had the coldest temperament and the sharpest use of troops. He was like an incomparably sharp steel knife. Putting aside the matter of the Northeast, Rinpoche wasn't far from Li Qianqiu. If he stayed put, he would be able to see Li Qianqiu tomorrow night. At present, the Great Xia army was on its way back, and the reinforcements from the Protectorate of the South were still 2 days away. Only the 3,500 soldiers that had been transferred from the various cities were following the Great Xia army from afar. Even with the winged cavalry and the 3,500 soldiers, it would still be difficult for Li Qianqiu to directly attack the Great Xia army. One had to know that there were a large number of practitioners in this Great Xia army. If they used the same method as they did outside Ziyue City and the aboriginals were hindered, the archers would fire in unison, greatly increasing the casualties of the aboriginals. After all, the practitioners were far faster than the aboriginal warriors of the same level. Therefore, he maintained a distance from the Great Xia army and began to retreat again to join up with Rinpoche. With Rinpoche's mortars disrupting the enemy's formation, the winged cavalry would insert their blades and continue to disrupt the enemy's formation. Li Qianqiu's troops would then be able to expand the enemy's chaos. At that time, the 3,500 soldiers would also attack at the right time. This Great Xia army would be attacked from both front and back and would definitely be defeated. Let's just wait here. It's tiring to run around. Rinpoche immediately decided to stay here after knowing Li Qianqiu's movements. On the afternoon of the next day, Rinpoche met the winged cavalry who was acting as a mounted scout. After being exposed to all kinds of grenades, mortar shells, and anti-aircraft machine guns, they felt a little awkward without Rinpoche at their back. Now that they saw the Great Xia army's formation, they immediately thought of looking for Principal Ren. With a round of artillery fire and a round of grenades, the enemy's front line would immediately be shattered. After that, it would be much easier to charge and kill. Not long after, when Rinpoche and Li Qianqiu met up, Li Qianqiu immediately used his huge palms to slap Rinpoche and said, "Principal Ren, I always feel like I'm missing something without you by my side. I'm relieved to see you." As he spoke, he slapped Li Qianqiu as if he was hammering a nail. By the time he finished speaking, Rinpoche's ankles had sunk into the ground. "If I can slap you into the ground in the future, I will miss you even if I don't see you for a day," Rinpoche thought to himself as he pulled his feet out of the ground. What did it mean to not bully the young for being poor? This was exactly what he was doing. "Where's the Great Xia army?" Rinpoche asked. "About 60 kilometers southeast," Li Qianqiu immediately replied. "When do we attack?" Rinpoche asked again. Chapter 375. Your Majesty, a letter came in from outside the city. Hongwu knocked on the door of the Empress's room and strode in. "What's written?" The Empress lay on the bed lazily and didn't like to move. It could be said that the pain in her body made her not want to move. "It says that if we let that army leave, we will release the siege of Tiesua Pass and Shun City and evacuate immediately." Hongwu placed that piece of paper on the Empress's bed. "Ha!" The Empress sneered. It was ridiculous that Great Xia still wanted to bring that army back at this time. Even if there were more casualties, they had to keep this army in Deyo. One had to know that this army was stained with the blood of the civilians. Even if there were more casualties, they had to bury this army in Deyo and suppress it. "Then I won't reply to them. How's your Majesty's health?" "Not bad," the Empress said faintly. Even though it felt like there were countless steel needles pricking her body, she only said faintly, "Not bad." She had been alone in the palace for a long time and had already formed her current temperament. Regardless of whether it was good or bad, bitter or happy, she wouldn't tell anyone. Therefore, when she was angry, she was like a volcano erupting and overflowing with murderous intent. Usually she was ice cold. It was only recently that she became more human. Occasionally, she would smile faintly like an ordinary person, think about her own troubles, or throw a little tantrum. "Your Majesty, don't hide it from me. How would I not know the consequences of this method? Your Majesty was too rash this time. You must not do this again." Hongwu couldn't help but start nagging. "Get out," the Empress said coldly. "Your Majesty, you must take care of yourself," Hongwu advised as he retreated. After Hongwu left, the Empress crumpled the letter into a ball and threw it on the ground. Then, she lay there and listened to the occasional news from the radio station. "Inform the vanguard to stop and set up camp." A middle-aged general in the advancing Great Xia army gave the order. This person is called Yu Zheng, Great Xia's Xianwei general. He is one of the commanders of the two armies that entered Deyo. At this time, the sun had just set and there were 4 hours before the sky turned dark. However, there were 2 Deyo armies patrolling around, so they had to be careful at all times. After setting up camp, the middle-aged general gathered the other generals into his tent. "How was today? The Deyo army behind us is still following us. They're neither getting closer nor pulling away. I reckon that they're aware that they don't have enough manpower and are waiting to join up with the others before attacking," a bearded general said in a deep voice. "We also found traces of Deyo's mounted scouts 15 kilometers to the west. It should be the winged cavalry," another commander said. Now that Wu Shengho is dead, the barbarians of Liao City will be able to free up their hands. After the two parties join forces, there will be 6,000 to 7,000 people. Together with the winged cavalry, it will indeed be a little troublesome, another general said. "Zhe Ying, Zhong Tianshan, the two of you will each take 10,000 men and set up an ambush outside the main camp tonight. The rest of you will wear helmets and armor tonight and remain vigilant," the middle-aged general at the head of the table ordered. "Sir, you mean? Make the same arrangements for the next few days. Don't let them attack at night," Yu Zheng instructed. In another military camp, the same arrangement was made. Although the two armies had joined together, they were still commanded by their respective generals. Wearing night vision goggles, Ren Baqian, Li Qianxiu, and the rest sneaked their way to a spot 1 kilometer away from Great Xia's campsite. "Hey, they're waiting for us." Ren Baqian looked at the camp with the night vision device and suddenly laughed. In the camp, all the tents near the fence were empty, and there was no thermal response at all. Even a fool would know that the other party was waiting for them. "Go and find out where their ambush troops are." Ren Baqian turned around and instructed Li Qianxiu. This kind of situation was often seen in movies and dramas. Usually, the people in the camp would be prepared, and there would be troops lying in ambush outside. When they rushed in, they would be attacked head-on, and the ambush troops outside would block their way of retreat and launch a pincer attack. Li Qianxiu gave the order, and soon, a few winged cavalry warriors disappeared into the darkness. After more than an hour, a winged cavalry warrior came back and reported, "There are at least 10,000 soldiers in the north and northwest direction of the Great Xia camp." Not long after, another winged cavalry warrior came back and reported, "There are 2 armies in the east and southeast direction of the Great Xia camp." Ren Baqian and Li Qianxiu calculated that there were at least 30,000 to 40,000 soldiers lying in ambush outside. Rather than attacking the camp, it was better to take down the ambush troops. After making up their minds, they didn't hesitate anymore. Together with the aboriginal army in the south, they kept an eye on those 2 armies and waited for them to make a move before attacking. Meanwhile, Ren Baqian, Li Qianxiu, and the winged cavalry warriors were close to the ambush troops in the northeast. Ren Baqian adjusted the mortar and didn't fire. Instead, he let the winged cavalry warriors sneak over first. Those Great Xia soldiers were still waiting to ambush them, and it was time to see who would be the one ambushing who. In a small forest that wasn't considered dense, tens of thousands of Great Xia soldiers were quietly lying in ambush, waiting for a possible night attack. Captain, do you think there will be a show tonight? Only God knows if there will be any problems. Just wait obediently and don't talk. But there are too many mosquitoes in this damn place. Very soon, the noises subsided again. Other than panting and the rustling sound of people moving their bodies, there were no other sounds. Many soldiers even started to doze off. A scream suddenly came from the edge of the forest. What's the matter? As soon as the captain asked this question, he heard thousands of people shouting from the edge of the forest, "Great Xia dogs, kill!" It's the Dayo soldiers. The people lying in ambush in the forest didn't have the time to think about why they were ambushed by someone else. They shouted one after another, waking up the soldiers who were dozing off. It's the winged cavalry. A scream came from afar, and the people in the forest, who didn't know what was happening, immediately understood. Light the torches! The captain shouted. Fighting the winged cavalry in the dark was simply courting death. They could only light the torches, form a formation, and wait for the main camp and the other ambush troops to come to their rescue. Very soon, Rinpoche saw the torches in the forest not far away. The light from the torches illuminated the forest red, and he could clearly see everything inside and outside. The ambush troops in the forest also clearly saw the approaching people and the gleaming cold swords that followed the figures. The weather is dry. Be careful of the candles. Rinpoche muttered softly. He took the cannonball and stuffed it into the barrel. He turned to the side and said, "Hold it." 2 guards immediately reached out to hold the barrel. Rinpoche then released his hands and covered his ears. Bang! 2 consecutive sounds rang out. The great Xia soldiers in the forest, who were hurriedly forming a formation, suddenly exploded into 2 balls of fire. Shrapnel flew everywhere and directly blew up a group of people. The already chaotic Great Xia army became even more chaotic after encountering such a situation. Rinpoche picked his ears, took the other 2 cannonballs, put them into the barrel and covered his ears. Another 2 balls of fire burst out in the forest. The Great Xia army in the north has moved and is rushing toward the forest. A mounted scout reported from the walkie-talkie. Set off. Li Qianxiu ordered his subordinates through the walkie-talkie. 3,000 soldiers immediately rushed toward the route of the ambush troops in the north. These 3,000 soldiers collided with the Great Xia army, and a loud "kill" immediately erupted. At this moment, the main camp of Great Xia was also in chaos. They had been waiting for the Dayo soldiers to attack at night, but they didn't expect them to be the 2 ambush troops outside. The camp hurriedly mobilized troops to rescue them. The north camp of Great Xia has moved. 3,000 to 4,000 people have come out, and they are all practitioners. A message came from the walkie-talkie. Quickly set up my great spear. Rinpoche shouted. He didn't forget to turn to Li Qianxiu and say, "For the happiness of Her Majesty." He then changed his tone to one of extreme pity and said, "You must protect me." Li Qianxiu was speechless. Chapter 376. Damn it! Rinpoche cursed and looked at the opposite side with the night vision goggles. In the past, Rinpoche rarely scolded people at work, but now he was more and more nagging. He didn't need to care about his image, and he would say whatever was on his mind. There were 3,000 to 4,000 martial artists. How many could he kill with a big gun? They weren't fools. Their legs were like car wheels, and he would be lucky if he could kill a few hundred of them after using up all his bullets. Looking through the night vision goggles, he saw a yellow and red heat source moving rapidly in his direction. Da-da-da. The machine gun on the ground spat out a tongue of fire, and a long metal dragon directly opened up a hole in the crowd. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. Rinpoche held the trigger and moved the muzzle to the left and right. The bullets scattered at a small angle. The red dots in the night vision goggles immediately fell. Some of the stronger martial artists used their weapons to block the bullets, and some of the weaker martial artists were directly shot in half. After a round of bullets, the opposing teams suddenly stopped. The ferocious firepower gave them a fright. The opponent's hidden weapons are powerful. Disperse. A voice shouted in the crowd. Everyone dispersed like sheep. Some people jumped a few meters high and then glided to the distance. Some people lowered their feet and disappeared into the crowd in the blink of an eye. Some people moved like monkeys. After a few somersaults, they landed on the periphery of the crowd and then ran into the distance. Some people lay on the ground like lizards. They weren't slower than running but slightly faster. Renbachien could see clearly with the night vision goggles. He pressed on the bullets and swept toward the place with the most number of people. Da-da-da, da-da-da. The gunfire paused for more than 10 seconds before it rang out again. After shooting 4 ammunition belts, Renbachien saw that the guards beside him were still loading bullets into the ammunition belts. The speed at which they fired was much faster than the speed at which they were loading bullets. He adjusted the angle of the mortar and fired it toward the place where the crowd was denser. There were too many people. Even after they dispersed, there were still many places where the crowd was more concentrated. Boom, boom. 2 explosions and shrapnel blasted dozens of people to the ground. Renbachien fired 7 or 8 shots in a row, and the other party started to figure out the ropes. Be careful of the top of your head, don't take it head-on. The other party will fall from the sky after the count of 23. Damn it, what a talent! Renbachien immediately cursed when he heard this from afar. After he finished cursing, he fired 2 shots in the direction of the voice. In the distance, a group of people looked up at the sky as they ran. Some people felt that there were more people nearby and immediately ran further away. It's above us. As the sound rang out, not only were the targets of the artillery shells affected, but the people in other areas were also affected and scattered. Boom. The sky was so dark that it was already very late by the time they discovered the shells. There were still some who could not run out of the explosion range, but the casualties were indeed a lot less. 2 shots at most killed 10 people. 2 miles, a distance of 1,000 meters, was shortened to 300 meters in just a minute. Thousands of people shouted to kill the barbarian dogs as they rushed in Renbachien's direction. Now, they were not going to rescue the great Xia soldiers in the small forest. Their minds were filled with the thought of killing the guy who fired the hidden weapons. At least 300 to 400 people were killed or maimed just now, and these people's eyes were bloodshot. Sir Li. Renbachien turned his head to look at Li Qianqiu pitifully. In the end, he saw Li Qianqiu's tent towering like a road sign. Renbachien was speechless. This is a war. Why are you so excited? Are you a masochist? I used to think that you were loyal, honest, and reliable. I didn't expect this. I really didn't expect this. At this moment, Renbachien's image of Li Qianqiu fell from the clouds to the ground, and he was immediately labeled as a perverted masochist. Sir, a shout came from not far away. Hundreds of winged cavalry warriors came out of the forest and surrounded Renbachien and the others. There was still a portion of the great Xia soldiers who were still inside the forest. About 500 winged cavalry warriors came out of the forest and were prepared to intercept these great Xia practitioners. It had only been 7 or 8 minutes since the surprise attack, and only the end of the battle was left in the forest. Under the circumstances where the other party didn't have an integrated military formation and didn't have an absolute advantage in numbers, they were like lambs in front of the winged cavalry, whose weakest members were at the earthwheel level. Seeing these winged cavalry warriors, Renbachien finally felt a little relieved. Now, even if he took off the night vision goggles, he could already see the figures of those great Xia practitioners. Each and every one of them was like a wild dog that had broken free from its leash and was holding a variety of weapons in their hands. Every one of them had bloodshot eyes. It was conceivable that their minds were filled with thoughts of tearing the people here apart. A few seconds later, the winged cavalry clashed with those great Xia practitioners. Blades flashed, and the sounds of killing, screams, and weapons colliding immediately rang out in the surroundings. It's Earthwheel. They're all Earthwheel experts. It's the winged cavalry. The great Xia practitioners cried out in alarm, and what greeted them was the silent and ferocious killing of the winged cavalry. However, there were also many powerful great Xia practitioners, and there were at least 200 to 300 Earthwheel experts among them. Although they weren't a match for the winged cavalry in a one-on-one fight, they were able to hold them back with the help of others. Some of the more skillful practitioners jumped into the circle from the air. It was obvious that the people inside were the important ones. To catch the bandits, one must first catch the ringleader. More than one person thought this way. Rinpoche spat. Do you think this thing is used to shoot at the ground? This thing is an anti-aircraft machine gun. Rinpoche was determined. He raised the muzzle and fired at a figure in the air. Da-da-da, clang, clang, clang. Sparks flew in all directions in the air. That figure kept twisting its body in the air, and the pair of daggers in its hands glittered with countless sparks. Awesome! As Rinpoche aimed the machine gun at that figure and sprayed bullets, a thought immediately flashed through his mind. The other party's weapon was definitely not ordinary. Otherwise, it definitely wouldn't be able to withstand so many bullets from the anti-aircraft machine gun. In the past, there were also people who felt that Rinpoche's dagger was very fast, but in the end, the dagger would break and the person would die. Rinpoche had already fired half a belt of bullets, but the other party had not only dodged the bullets, but also withstood dozens of bullets. Rinpoche felt that he might have encountered a treasure, and he would definitely snatch the dagger from that person later. He watched as that person brandished the dagger and collided with the bullets, getting further and further away from Rinpoche and higher from the ground. Rinpoche felt that if he had an unlimited supply of bullets, he could shoot that person to the moon. Clang! That person finally couldn't block the dagger. One of his legs was broken by the bullet, and he fell from the sky with a blood-curdling scream. Rinpoche fired a few more shots as if he was shooting a flying saucer. Blood splattered in the air, and that person fell to the ground in pieces. Rinpoche memorized the place where that person fell and waited to pick up the dagger after the battle. Li Qianqiu picked up his huge axe, jumped up, and hacked at another warrior who was approaching. When the other party saw the axe, which was as big as a door plank, slashed at him 7 times with the sword in his hand. Each slash hit the side of the axe, and a huge force was transmitted from the axe to Li Qianqiu's hand. Li Qianqiu acted as if he didn't feel anything. The trajectory of the huge axe didn't change at all, and it directly split that person in half from head to toe. He then threw the axe horizontally, drawing a straight line in the air and cutting the chest of another warrior who was pouncing toward Rinpoche in half. It was as if there was a rain of blood in the sky, splattering Rinpoche's face. Rinpoche reloaded the belt of bullets and continued to operate the machine gun. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was going to shoot whoever jumped higher. The sounds of fighting and screams, the flying heads and severed arms, and the cries of lost loved ones and close friends all affected him. His whole body trembled with excitement, and his killing intent surged. Chapter 377. The martial artists of Great Xia were defeated faster than they had imagined. Before this, Rinpoche hadn't seen the Aboriginals and Great Xia fight openly. They had always been defending the city or attacking at night. However, according to some rumors, the casualties of Great Xia's elite troops were usually 30 to 50%. This ratio was already considered a strong army. Even though these practitioners wouldn't obey orders, Rinpoche had always felt that they were more courageous and had a huge numerical advantage. In addition, they usually lived on the edge of a knife, so they would only collapse when the casualty rate was at least 30%. However, Rinpoche ignored the psychological pressure these practitioners felt when they faced the silent winged cavalry warriors. There had always been rumors that the Aboriginals could defeat ordinary practitioners of the same level. In particular, they could see their own people falling one by one with blood spurting out from their bodies. On the other hand, the other side had very few casualties. Other than some famous earthwheel experts who could contend with or even defeat them, most people were barely holding on and completely using their lives to fill the gap. Under such circumstances, many people had the intention to retreat when they found out who their opponents were. If their opponents were ordinary Aboriginal soldiers, they could still see some hope. However, they couldn't see any hope of victory when facing these winged cavalry warriors. In addition, they weren't the elites of the army who obeyed military orders. Even the death of Lu Pinghai could cause an uproar among the practitioners in the north, let alone when they were faced with hundreds of earthwheel experts and were surrounded by death. Some of the quick-witted ones had already started to flee. This kind of behavior also spurred the others on. Furthermore, many of them weren't fleeing toward the Great Xia barracks but toward the northwest. As long as they could escape back to Great Xia, it would be better to conceal their identities than to lose their lives here. When the casualty rate was about 20%, the Great Xia practitioners began to disperse and flee in all directions. This 20% casualty rate was due to the winged cavalry killing too quickly. Most of the casualties were the weaker practitioners. Many of the winged cavalry kicked the ground and flew into the distance like cannonballs. If one didn't consider dodging techniques, Great Xia practitioners who were below the earthwheel level were definitely no match for the winged cavalry when they ran in a straight line. However, Great Xia practitioners who were at the same level were far superior to the winged cavalry. Chase them for 500 meters and return. Li Qianqiu's voice rang out. Ren Baqian aimed the anti-aircraft gun for a long time and finally gave up resentfully. Otherwise, the winged cavalry would suffer the most casualties tonight. The winged cavalry warriors gave chase for a short while before returning. Each of them sat on the ground and used the strips of cloth that were torn from the corpses to wipe their sabers. Not long after, the winged cavalry warriors came out from the forest. At the very least, within their range of perception, there were no other living beings apart from them. The Great Xia soldiers were completely annihilated, and only a few managed to escape. The winged cavalry was more familiar with the forest. One had to know that most of the winged cavalry were recruited from the 60,000 mountains. Has the Great Xia barracks not come out yet? Ren Baqian sat on the ground and asked through the walkie-talkie. Sir, they haven't come out yet. They've only strengthened their defenses. Oh, Ren Baqian replied and fell to the ground with his head raised. Great Xia's response was very normal. If they came out to rescue, it would probably cause even more casualties. Under the circumstances of night and limited visibility, the strength of the Great Xia army was at its lowest, while the strength of the aboriginals wasn't affected. Even though they knew that there were only a few thousand ancient race soldiers outside, they still didn't dare to move recklessly. However, in Ren Baqian's mind, it was only a matter of time before he died. It would take at least a week to reach the border from here. There was no way they could make it out alive. Li Qianqiu wouldn't let them make it out alive either. The hands of this army were stained with the blood of the aboriginals. Although Ren Baqian didn't see it with his own eyes, he heard that many villages that weren't notified in time were directly flattened. There were also a few cities that had been destroyed. Ren Baqian looked at the galaxy in the night sky, sighed, and turned to ask Li Qianqiu, do you think the Great Xia people will also want to seek revenge on us? Just kill all those who want revenge. Kill them until they don't even dare to think about it. Li Qianqiu grinned cruelly in the style of the aboriginals. To Ren Baqian, Li Qianqiu was a pretty good person. However, to outsiders, all the aboriginals were cruel and bloodthirsty. The enemy of another is my hero. Ren Baqian sighed and threw this matter aside. In the past, he felt that human life was very important. He always felt that he was a good person, helping an old lady cross the road, being friendly to others, and helping others whenever he could. Even though he hadn't done any of these things before, he still felt that he was a good person. Even so, he still felt that he was a good person. Only the heavens knew when it started, but in his heart, human life had become just a noun. When the 3,000 soldiers returned and everyone was preparing to sneak toward the two ambushing troops in the south, they received news that the two ambushing troops were actually preparing to return to their barracks. Great Xia was originally prepared to leave a few ambushing troops to attack Dayo from the front and back, but they didn't expect the ambushing troops to become dishes on the table. How could they still leave those two troops there? When the aboriginal troops in the south realized that the other party was actually returning to their barracks, it was already too late. They could only watch as they returned to their barracks in the dark of the night. We have fought tonight. Come again tomorrow night, Ren Baqian said as he yawned. In one night, they had destroyed 1/7 of Great Xia's troops and scattered those practitioners. Now that Great Xia had already set up their battle formation in their barracks, there was no need to continue. When it was almost daybreak, the two armies finally converged. The 3,500 soldiers originally belonged to the Protectorate of the Center. At this time, they didn't cause any waves when they returned to Li Qianqiu's command. Other than the necessary scouts and sentries, the rest fell asleep. There were no tents or anything like that at all. In the wilderness, the Aboriginals basically used the sky as their blanket and the ground as their bed. Given the physique of the Aboriginals, they didn't care about the damp and cold at night. Ren Baqian slept in his clothes for the night. The next day, he woke up with a bruise on his forehead and an embarrassed look on his face. This bunch of damned mosquitoes. After killing livestock and barbecuing meat, everyone chased after the Great Xia army. The other party had just set up camp when Rinpochian and the others arrived. They started a fire and barbecued meat dozens of kilometers away, waiting for the night attack. A few hours later, in the middle of the night, Rinpochian and the others found their way to the outside of the Great Xia barracks. "Sure enough, they are waiting for us," Rinpochian said after checking with the night vision device. Although the Great Xia barracks weren't in a battle formation, the tents outside were all empty, just like the day before. Inside the barracks, there were large areas of heat sources lying in ambush waiting for them. The other party was so densely packed, and tens of thousands of people were standing there like fools. Rinpochian felt that he would be letting them down if he didn't fire a few cannons. He immediately used mortars and fired 2 cannons at the densely packed area. Following the explosions, there was obviously some chaos in the barracks, but it was quickly suppressed. Boom! 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 After 7 or 8 cannons, the chaos in the Great Xia barracks could no longer be suppressed. They didn't even see the enemy, but every explosion sent people tumbling. "Sir, what should we do?" A few generals gathered in a corner of the Great Xia barracks. "Let's kill our way out," someone suggested. "Kill our way out? That group of barbarians is waiting outside." We saw smoke in the distance in the evening, and they might have gathered together. There are at least 6,000 to 7,000 of them. If we go out at night, I'm afraid we will die. Another general frowned. But staying here is also a dead end. If we continue to wait, our morale will be gone. We might as well go out and kill a few more barbarians. Another general said anxiously. The timely sound of the cannons was a footnote to his words. The group was caught in a dilemma. They couldn't go out now, but they couldn't stay either. If they went out, the Aboriginals would be waiting outside. If they fought in the dark, the outcome would be obvious. If they didn't go out, they would be passively beaten. Furthermore, they couldn't even see the enemy. The soldiers below had already started to get restless. After a while, they would be in chaos before the enemy came to fight. Aggrieved. Everyone had the same thought in their hearts. This battle was too aggrieving. They didn't know whether to advance or retreat. They had never fought such an aggrieved battle before. Finally, the person who was surrounded in the middle spoke. "I don't believe that they won't run out of these weapons." Chapter 378. After the next few rounds, the enemy remained motionless except for the area near the explosion site. Rinpochian hoped that the other party would make a move. After the other party moved, they would create a certain amount of chaos so that it would be easier for the army to break in. With such an explosion, it seemed like the enemy had no way to retaliate, but the number of artillery shells was limited. If Rinpochian had 1,000 or 800 artillery shells, he would be able to bombard them until they doubted their lives. He was sure that when they returned to Great Xia, they would ponder, "Who am I? What am I doing?" The problem was that there was none. The other side did not move, and many of them squatted down to try and reduce the damage from the explosives. If he continued to bombard them for a while longer, they would probably fall to the ground. Then, they would immediately discover that the damage of the shells would be greatly reduced when they fell to the ground. "Where are their rations?" Rinpochian turned his head and asked Li Qianqiu. Very quickly, dozens of winged cavalry warriors surrounded the enemy's camp to investigate. Very soon, the news came back. The enemy's rations were also tightly surrounded. Where can I see it? Go and take a look, Renbaqian said. No need to go through so much trouble. Li Qianqiu waved his hand. Carrying Renbaqian with one hand, he exerted force with his legs and leaped 20 to 30 meters into the air. Renbaqian took off his night vision goggles and could barely see the rations in the middle. The outer fence was filled with torches, but there wasn't much light inside. However, everyone had torches in their hands. As long as the Dayo army attacked, they would light up the torches and the camp would immediately be brightly lit. However, there were still some torches in the center, which allowed him to see them clearly. In the middle of the mountainous pile of rations, the great Xia soldiers stood in a battle formation with their backs against the rations. Although they surrounded the rations, due to the terrain and layout, the two gates had the most people, while the north barracks had the least people. In the army, there were two camps, one in the south and one in the north. This way, they could help each other and not interfere with each other. Among them, the first army to enter Dayo was the current north barracks. Most of the practitioners were in the north barracks, but they were scattered in yesterday's battle. It was unknown how many of them returned to the barracks. Yesterday, more than half of the 20,000 soldiers in ambush had been lost, and only a few had managed to escape. Now, there were no more than 40,000 people in the camp. The south camp that attacked tonight was made up of the 100,000 reinforcements that came later. There were still 80,000 of them left. When Renbaqian was at the highest point, he could see everything below him clearly. Then there was a ripping sound. For a moment, Renbaqian couldn't feel the hand that was grabbing his collar. His clothes couldn't bear the weight and were pulled apart. He was scared out of his wits. With his current strength, falling from a height of 20 to 30 meters, even if he didn't die from the fall, his legs would definitely be broken. Most importantly, when his clothes were torn, it would tear him. He couldn't control his body at all. Fortunately, Li Qianqiu reacted in an instant and grabbed his arm, pulling him down from the sky. Like a meteorite crashing into the ground, the entire ground shook. As soon as he landed, Renbaqian cursed, "Damn you! Wouldn't it have been fine if he had just grabbed her arm and jumped up from the beginning?" Just now, his heart rate had almost soared to 180. Li Qianqiu pulled his leg out from the ground and turned to look at him. He was silent at first before he asked, "Do you know him?" Renbaqian, while telling himself not to get angry at these bastards, he continued to sulk. After a long time, he finally calmed down and started calculating the position of the enemy's rations. The clothes on his body had turned into a pile of rags, which he randomly wrapped around his body. He was no better than a beggar. Compared to the aboriginals, a large portion of his skin was exposed. Countless mosquitoes looked at him as if they were looking at Tang Seng, but he didn't notice them at all. "Extinguish all the torches," Renbaqian said. Dozens of winged cavalry warriors drew their bows and arrows. After a round of shots, the torches at the fence of the barracks were immediately shot off and fell to the ground. The light also dimmed. As dozens of winged cavalry warriors wandered around the barracks, more and more places became dimmer. This is how they are inside. Renbaqian drew an oval on the ground and marked the position near the middle. This was the position of the rations. In front of the barracks was a thick formation. The formation near the river and the north barracks was slightly weaker. The north barracks was the weakest, but it was easy for them to be pincered. As such, the position near the river was the best place to attack. In a while, I will use artillery fire to ignite their rations, and they will definitely fall into chaos. You guys cut in from here and kill your way out from here. After making a turn, you will exit from here and circle back to this point to await further orders. With your attack, they will definitely be affected in putting out the fire. Due to this delay, the fire will become bigger, and they will have to get water if they want to put out the fire. The others will lie in ambush at the place where they get water and kill whoever comes. Next, it depends on their reaction. It is impossible for the other party to ignore the rations. The rations in the North Barracks are definitely not enough to last until they return to Great Xia. In that case, it is very likely that they will send a portion of their troops to the water source, cover the area, and then push the rest of the army up. Therefore, the troops at the water source have to be careful. There isn't a need to intercept too many people in the early stages, and the rest will be outside the firing range on both sides. As for how to deal with it, it will depend on the arrangement of the other party's troops. If there are no accidents, we will take down one of them, Rinpoche said as he drew the map. He had never learned any of the 36 stratagems or the art of war. As for the plan, Rinpoche felt that no matter what, it was better to have a plan than not. In any case, the worst outcome would be a head-on confrontation. With their current strength and the fact that they could disrupt the other party's formation with their mortars, they wouldn't lose even if they fought head-on. They just needed to minimize the number of casualties. What they were relying on now was that the other party didn't dare to act rashly and was holed up in one place. They were well aware of the other party's every move. In addition, they had the walkie-talkies to direct communication and the mortars to attack from afar. Furthermore, the strong individual strength of the Aboriginal warriors could be better utilized in the chaos. On Earth, could 1,000 Aboriginal warriors attack 100,000 people? In this world, it was possible. The strength of an ordinary soldier was only 200 to 300 kilograms, but the strength of the winged cavalry warriors was 2,000 to 3,000 kilograms. They could slash bullets. This kind of reaction speed, and tremendous strength allowed the winged cavalry, an Aboriginal elite, to fight against 100 people. It was as if they were unparalleled. All of these factors added up to their advantage. A few of the key points were the walkie-talkies and night vision devices that were brought over from Earth. Even though they wouldn't cause direct damage, they played a huge role. The night vision devices allowed them to see the other party's every move in the dark. The walkie-talkies could directly contact the army and didn't require any messengers to go down. Whether it was mobilizing troops or issuing other orders, they could be reached in time. What should we do if the northern barracks come to our rescue? Li Qianxiu asked. In that case, find something for them to do first, Rinpoche replied. Everyone approached the vicinity of the North Barracks, and Rinpoche took another high-altitude tour. The rations of the North Barracks were almost the same as those of the South Barracks. Send 500 men to the riverbank of the North Barracks and prepare to intercept them. Li Qianxiu used the walkie-talkie to make arrangements. Rinpoche adjusted the angle and fired. 10 shells were fired in a row. Each time, the angle was adjusted slightly. This round of artillery fire was just enough to cover half of the North Barracks rations. When each shell exploded, the sparks that sprayed out ignited the surrounding rations. The North Barracks, which had been on high alert, immediately became chaotic. Immediately, there were cries of "Water! Put out the fire!" The Great Xia army first overturned the rations cart to minimize their losses. Then, they rushed to the nearby tents and used bedding to cover the rations. At the same time, they also sent some people to the riverbank to fetch water. However, there were immediately shouts from the riverbank. The 1,000 soldiers who went to fetch water were like meat buns that were beaten up. However, in a short period of time. Chapter 379. With a series of explosions, the South Barracks quickly became chaotic. The soldiers could withstand the bombardment and continue to turtle up, but the rations couldn't. Without rations, Dayo didn't need to attack, and this army would starve to death along the way. This Great Xia army immediately responded in kind. The soldiers surrounding the perimeter also made their preparations. They all knew that the attack of the Aboriginals was coming. The first thing they faced wasn't the charge of the winged cavalry, but another round of artillery shells from Rinpoche. More than a dozen artillery shells were fired in succession, spreading from the densest position to the side. More than half of the artillery shells hit the position where the winged cavalry was preparing to attack. Then, close to the river, 1,000 winged cavalry warriors appeared from the darkness. With the flash of a blade, a section of the fence fell, and the winged cavalry formed a cone-shaped formation and charged toward the enemy. Like a knife cutting through butter, the Great Xia army, which had yet to recover from the chaos, was directly cut apart. First, the tip was inserted, and then the winged cavalry at the back widened the gap. Every time the front was blocked, a few people would jump out from the back and continue to use the tip of the blade to penetrate deeper. In just 5 minutes, they had killed their way from the edge to the center. The winged cavalry on the periphery immediately spread out like a blooming flower, or rather, from a fist into a palm. The soldiers in the center of the Great Xia army fell in rows. At the same time, some people set fire everywhere, overturning the rations carts into burning positions, causing the fire to grow bigger and more rations to be destroyed. Li Qianqiu jumped up and down in the darkness to observe the movements of the Great Xia army. He saw that the 2-meter radius under his feet was half a meter lower than the rest. This caused Rinpochen to turn his attention to him. Under Li Qianqiu's command, before the winged cavalry was completely surrounded by Great Xia, they killed their way out from the weakest point in the north. After kicking down the fence, they escaped from the small open space between the north barracks and the north barracks, quickly disappearing into the night. Previously, the Great Xia army in the south barracks could still reduce their losses by separating the rations and using quilts to extinguish the fire. However, the raging fire at this moment made them give up on this idea. At least half of the rations had been turned into flames. In the middle of the Great Xia army, the middle-aged general looked at the huge flame in front of him with an ashen face. The light from the flame formed a strange red color on his face. "Get water and put out the fire." He squeezed out 2 words with difficulty. "Sir, I'm afraid they are waiting outside." The disturbance in the north barracks was caused by their rations being burned, but of course, of those barbarians of theirs didn't attack them. Someone immediately reported. "Soldiers with swords and shields, get ready. Gunners, get ready. Archers, get ready of the crossbow battalion," the general of Great Xia ordered. With the transfer of military orders, a total of 20,000 people formed a military formation near the river. At the front were the saber and shield troops, behind them were the crossbow troops, and further back were 2 rows of pikemen. Behind them were 3 rows of archers. While they were moving in the darkness outside the camp, 2 people were moving up and down, Rinpochen sighed as he descended from the sky. He was jumping up and down as if he was jumping on a spring bed. Die of, they were to they of them of. Damn it, if you die in the future, you'll definitely die of stupidity. Also, why are you erecting a tent? My lord, we've managed to snatch back half of the rations. We don't have enough time for the rest. Do we still need to fetch water? A general pointed at the huge bonfire in front of them. These things couldn't be saved even if they were watered. As the winged cavalry had done a great job of setting the fire when they charged in, Rinpochen wanted to lure them over to fetch water to put out the fire. In the end, they had given up on that idea. The commanding general of the south camp had a murderous look on his face. "Act as though we are going to draw water. Send some people out to probe. If the aboriginals are outside, fire immediately." Following his order, the army that had already been set up moved towards the riverside. They stopped when they were 200 feet away from the fence, and the archers shot 3 rounds of arrows outwards. Under Rinpochen's command, the aboriginal soldiers who were intercepting and killing outside lay prone on the other side of the fence. This position was just out of reach. The arrow pierced through the air and fell into the river. Following which, a few hundred Great Xia soldiers rushed out with buckets of water in their hands. Then blood-curdling screams could be heard. Release. The Great Xia soldiers in the camp fired 3 rounds of arrows without any hesitation. This time, the sound of arrows piercing human bodies could be heard. During the war between Dayo and Great Xia, the most casualties were caused by shooting from outside a certain range. If both sides engaged in hand-to-hand combat, there would be fewer casualties, but the casualties of the other side would rise sharply. Rinpochen and Li Qianqiu watched from afar as Great Xia fired rounds of arrows and felt slightly puzzled. Something doesn't seem right. Just as he was feeling puzzled, the other party sent out a few hundred death squads to charge outside. When the sounds of fighting were heard, several rounds of arrows immediately rained down from inside the camp. Damn, they aren't trying to put out the fire at all. They are fishing. Rinpoche looked at the army that was standing motionless in place and immediately reacted. According to his original plan, if the other party wanted to put out the fire, they would definitely push the army to the riverside. At that time, they would be out of the range of the camp and further away from the great Xia soldiers in the middle of the camp. Then, his own army would kill their way over and swallow these 20,000 soldiers. One had to know that a camp with 80,000 soldiers had to have a radius of at least 5 kilometers. For example, this south camp was 4 kilometers wide and 7 to 8 kilometers wide. From the center of the camp to the gate facing the river, it was only 1 kilometer away. However, the rear end of this army was only 1 kilometer away from the center of the camp, and the other great Xia soldiers would only need a few minutes to provide support. The other party stood there motionlessly and wouldn't move forward even if they were beaten to death. Instead, they sent out a few hundred soldiers twice in a row. When the sounds of fighting were heard, they immediately covered the area and fired without even caring about their own people. Damn, this is different from what I thought, Rinpoche cursed. At present, the distance between this army and the other great Xia soldiers in the middle of the camp was much shorter than what Rinpoche had expected. If they were to rush over now, it would be impossible for them to retreat before the other party arrived to provide support. At that time, it would become a head-on confrontation, which went against his initial plan of minimizing casualties. However, the other party wasn't a marionette. How could they possibly act according to his plan? Should we go or not? Li Qianqiu asked. According to his plan, they would directly charge over now and kill the other party's reinforcements when they arrived. There was nothing to be afraid of. 6,000 strong soldiers and 1,000 winged cavalry warriors could be said to have a sufficient chance of winning against 80,000 great Xia soldiers. The only problem was that the losses would be greater. Go. If the conditions are right, then go. If not, then force yourself on them. Rinpoche spat and continued, the rest of you, get ready to retreat. The winged cavalry, get into position. I will first bombard them with artillery fire. The winged cavalry will charge in and kill 2 rounds before withdrawing. After Rinpoche expressed his determination, he still felt that there was no need to fight recklessly. There were still 7 days left, and the journey was long. If he conserved his troops, he would still have to go to the Yun nation to snatch weapons. However, it was all thanks to the Empress's winged cavalry warriors. With this elite force, whether it was facing the charge of 100,000 soldiers, ending the battle quickly, harassing them at night, or long-distance raids, there was nothing that they couldn't do. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.